Chapter 1032. Xianyuan Wushang's somewhat absent-minded voice reverberated in the depths of his colorful consciousness. Voices of "so that's how it is" could be heard everywhere, like the whispers of heaven and earth. The huge crown floating in front of him glowed, layer upon layer of light spreading in all directions. Xianyuan Wushang stared blankly at the scene in front of him. Some vague images began to appear in his mind, but he couldn't remember them. The vague memories seemed to be from a very distant time ago, but also seemed to be from just a second ago. The images twisted as they appeared, and then quickly faded away. Xianyuan Wushang wasn't sure if he had ever seen the crown in front of him. It was so gorgeous and exquisite, and so dignified and graceful. Countless illusory lights wove it together, weaving it into reality. The scene in front of him seemed familiar, but for a moment Xianyuan Wushang didn't know what the crown meant. The light spread. Xianyuan Wushang continued forward. The distance between them continued to shrink. The crown seemed to be offended, and colorful light instantly gushed out. This time, the boundless light seemed to have a mind of its own. It was countless times more terrifying than what Xianyuan Wushang had just experienced. The clear, colorful light rushed through Xianyuan Wushang's body, instantly shattering the clear light covering his body. Countless pieces of his flesh were instantly torn to shreds. Xianyuan Wushang's face was deathly pale. He clenched his teeth and stubbornly moved forward in the sky full of light. He had long since run out of options. He had no way out of here before he saw the person he wanted to see. Large pieces of flesh fell off in the light. Blood that was so red that it was dazzling to the eyes flowed unscrupulously. He moved forward. Countless pieces of flesh fell off his body. Xianyuan Wushang's whole body was covered in countless wounds, and his bones were visible. His limbs, chest, abdomen, and head. Pieces of flesh were constantly torn off. Xianyuan Wushang disappeared in the light. Only a skeleton was left, persevering as it slowly walked forward. The red blood disappeared. Drops of golden liquid flowed out of the skeleton's bones. The golden blood turned into light, merging with the colorful light of the crown. The crown clearly sensed something, and the light around it suddenly stopped. The skeleton took the last step. He reached out, as if to touch the crown in front of him. The crown floated back for an instant. In the next second, countless images instantly enveloped the skeleton. It was like an abyss. All that was left of Xianyuan Wushang was his skeleton. An incomparably majestic yet incomparably gloomy voice echoed between heaven and earth. He failed. But there is still a chance. Can you afford to wait? Who knows how long it will take? Time is meaningless. I'll go. What can we do? Maybe I can't do anything, but at least I can be with him. You think this is a good thing? How is he now? It's hard to say. I can't find him. Based on his current state, he might have entered the Order Realm or fallen into the Shadow Realm. Perhaps. In short, none of the possibilities are what we want. But it's you, not me. What do you want? Whether it's real or illusory, I just want to be with him. Say no more. Brother, send us to Miracle City. Falling. Countless rays of light weaved into a bottomless abyss. The images were like a deep well that devoured all of Xianyuan Wushang's consciousness. From now on, I'm Gu Xianyan. Welcome to Kunlun City. Welcome to Phoenix Pavilion. As clear as water, as pure as snow, as ethereal as wind, as cold as fog, she is an outstanding beauty. This woman will bring chaos to the world. Remember this man. Li Tianlan? This is my goal. Stay by his side. Xianyan greets your highness. Ha! The first beauty of Zhongzhou State deserves this title. Gu Xianyan leaves Kunlun City today. That's it. You have me completely. Really? Why don't you admit it? I don't know. You know it. Stop it. Don't force me. I'm pregnant. You're so perfunctory in naming your child. I hate it. Who dares to fight with me? It hurts. Why don't you fight back? I'm sorry. Xianyuan Wushang's consciousness fell into a snowstorm. Kill my man. It's us. Don't you think I look like a bird? The multicolored light and the multicolored sword light suddenly overlapped. I'll find him and take this world with me. All of you. Die with him. I want to be with him. From today on, you're called Gu Xianyan. I'm Qin Wei Bai. But I'm Qin Wei Bai. I am. I'm the future. I'm the past. Let me go, you bitch. No, I won't let you go. Li Tianlan bastard. The almost eternal sword light pierced through the sky, piercing through the supreme monument of martial arts of this era. It's all over. The colorful sword light dissipated instantly. All the light around disappeared. Extreme darkness and silence enveloped everything. Xianyuan Wushang kept falling. His speed kept increasing. But there was always darkness and silence around him. Xianyuan Wushang, who was only a skeleton, couldn't even hear his own heartbeat and blood flow. The continuous fall seemed to become endless eternity. It was long and short. Everything lost its meaning. His consciousness gradually blurred, and his thoughts gradually solidified. The darkness around him was so real that it seemed to merge with him. Xianyuan Wushang struggled subconsciously. Boundless light suddenly shone brightly. The wind and snow filled the sky. The eternal sword light suddenly lit up in the wind and snow that filled the sky. The wind and snow were flying and huge waves were surging. The sword light was like a rainbow, tearing the world apart. The whole world seemed to be full of chaotic and crazy sword light, with extreme silence and destruction. The corpses of the Wang family of Beihai were everywhere. The weapon fragments with empty ammunition covered the whole battlefield. The land was sunken, and the stage of formidable person was torn apart. The corpses spread all the way from afar. Xianyuan Wushang's sight seemed to cross the distance, and fell on Shengzhou City not far away. The entire Shengzhou City had been completely turned into ruins. Countless corpses were scattered on every street and alley. The flag of the Beihai Corps had been broken. The entire Beihai Corps seemed to have been completely annihilated, destroyed along with Shengzhou City. The ruins of Mount Dibing were about to disappear. The violent waves of Beihai surged over, and was about to cover everything that used to be Mount Dibing. The land turned into the sea. A quiet, almost old figure stood on the surface of the sea. Wisps of sword energy kept flowing out of his body and turned into the craziest and most silent sword light. The sword light drove the space, and the whole world seemed to undulate with his sword light. Xianyuan Wushang, who was completely a skeleton, looked at the man above the sea. This was clearly a man who had just entered middle age. He looked at most 40 years old. He did not look old at all. On the contrary, he was very handsome. He seemed to have inherited his mother's genes. Even in middle age, his appearance could still be described as handsome. Like the breeze at dawn, the moonlight at night, and the sunset at dusk, he was ethereal and dreamy. Just from his appearance, he was almost a perfect man without any flaws. But he was simply too quiet. That kind of quiet was indifferent and lonely, as if he had lost interest in everything in the world. For a moment, Xianyuan Wushang couldn't figure out how much pain and despair he had suffered in his life, to become the current state step by step. The moment he saw him, he had already seen a touch of numb old age and fatigue under his perfect appearance. He stood quietly on the sea. The sword energy and heaven and earth shook together. Behind him was a group of densely packed figures also floating in the air. There were Chinese, Europeans, Americans, and even quite a few black people. There were people of all races. They floated neatly behind the man, looking at him with eyes full of fanaticism and worship that were almost irrational. The man, who was so quiet that he seemed to have lost his soul, turned a blind eye to the countless eyes behind him. Strong wind, huge waves flying snow. He stood in the air and slowly moved forward. The sword energy began to condense, and his dead eyes became more and more determined. "Why are you so persistent, Your Majesty?" A helpless voice rang out. Less than a few hundred meters away from the man, there was a huge stone carved with countless names floating on the sea. A few figures were standing on it. An extremely ordinary-looking figure stood at the forefront of the huge stone. Behind him was a seriously injured young man, and a woman whose age was unknown, and whose whole body was integrated with some kind of metal. In the vast Beihai, the Wang family of Beihai that had stood at the peak of the dark world for hundreds of years. When everything ended, there was only the mother and son left. At the end of the road, the young man, who looked very ordinary both in appearance and temperament, said in a sincere voice, "The cause of the past is the effect of today. The Wang family of Beihai has been completely destroyed and vanished. Everything has come to an end. Why are you so ruthless, Your Majesty? Completely destroyed? Disappear into thin air? The man whose appearance, temperament, and every movement was perfect sneered. No, there are still 2 people alive. When they die, the so-called Wang family of Beihai will truly vanish. Li Dongqing, I swear, if I can survive today, I will destroy the sword dynasty I built. I will make them die without descendants. On the huge stone, the seriously injured man standing behind the ordinary young man gritted his teeth and roared word by word. His tone was extremely sad and indignant. Almost everyone in the dark world knew that when President Wang Jingxin of Zhongzhou State retired, the Wang family of Beihai would be destroyed. Beihai had been preparing for a life-and-death battle with the Sword Dynasty a few years ago. In recent years, Beihai had been crazily cultivating experts and upgrading various weapon systems. All the financial resources were invested in it at all costs. All kinds of weapon systems were laid from Mount Dibing to Shenzhou City. The scale of the Beihai Corps was constantly expanding. All of this was for today. It was November 1st in Zhongzhou State time. Just yesterday, October 31st, the election of Zhongzhou State officially ended. Wang Jingxin resigned as president. Less than 2 hours later, Chen Xiaobei's eyes lit up. The Sword Dynasty soldiers marched into Beihai. The soldiers arrived at the city. Shenzhou was already in ruins. Needless to say, the other major sword-holding families outside Shenzhou were almost completely destroyed. The situation of each city would only be worse than that of Shenzhou, not better. The pride that the Wang family of Beihai had maintained for hundreds of years was almost torn apart today. As the center of the battlefield, Shenzhou, sword god Li Dongqing landed in Shenzhou alone. He killed nearly half of the elites of the Beihai Corps and destroyed countless weapon systems. With countless weapon systems, the sword light was monstrous. Finally, he climbed Mount Dibing alone. It was impossible to stop and resist. But when a person could really be invincible to a certain extent, all the resistance became a complete joke in his eyes. Countless lineal descendants of the Wang family of Beihai died in the battle on Mount Dibing. In the entire Beihai, only Wang Haoyan, Summer Solstice, and the Stone of Formidable Person fell to the sea after the stage of Formidable Person was broken. If it weren't for this ordinary man who suddenly appeared in front of him and blocked Li Dongqing's sword, no one in Beihai would have survived. Get out of the way, Li Dongqing said slowly. The man in front of him, who protected the last vitality of the Wang family of Beihai, didn't seem to have a high realm. He seemed to be at the peak of the invincible realm, but he blocked his sword light. He hoped that such a talent could stay for the Sword Dynasty. Your strength is good. You can join the Sword Dynasty. In the future, the Sword Dynasty will have a place. Don't be a busybody, Li Dongqing said calmly. I'm very willing to join the Sword Dynasty. I'm actually a painter. If I can be an art teacher in the Sword Dynasty, I think it's actually pretty good, but the ordinary man laughed. I'm not a busybody, Your Majesty. This is my family business. Family business, understand? Li Dongqing was silent for a while. I don't understand, he said slowly. I have no family business, and I don't have a home. No family business, no home. The ordinary man's heart suddenly sank. Li Dongqing's voice was very soft, but he knew very well what this sentence meant. The blood feud was absolutely irreconcilable, and they would not stop until one of them died. He laughed bitterly. Do you know what it's like to lose your family? Li Dongqing suddenly asked. His voice was a little soft. The seemingly ordinary man thought for a while and asked, I killed my biological father with my own hands. Does that count? Li Dongqing, my master also killed his biological father with his own hands. Does that count? Li Dongqing, if it counts. The young man whispered. This feeling is actually very cool, but also very empty. It seems that all the goals of struggle disappeared the moment I killed him, and there is no direction in life. He looked into Li Dongqing's eyes. It's really cool, but after a moment of coolness, there is only endless emptiness. It's really not a good feeling. Your Majesty, now that you have completely destroyed the Wang family of Beihai, I feel the same as I did at that time. The only goal of living is to kill your father? Li Dongqing raised his eyebrows. Destroying the Wang family of Beihai had always been his goal, and it was even the only meaning of his life. Yes. The ordinary man was silent for a while and whispered, "At least I used to be." Li Dongqing narrowed his eyes and suddenly asked, "What's your name?" "Xianyuan Samsara." The ordinary man laughed. "Tianjue, Xianyuan Samsara of the War God realm. Xianyuan Wushang." Xianyuan Wushang's consciousness suddenly fluctuated for a moment. The light enveloped his body, but it did not hurt him. Instead, it pushed him forward. Xianyuan Wushang's body staggered forward and appeared directly on the sea. In an instant, countless eyes suddenly gathered on Xianyuan Wushang. Li Dongqing raised his eyebrows slightly, looking at the fat man who suddenly appeared, a little puzzled. At that moment, he did not even know how the man appeared. Xianyuan Samsara, who had just finished introducing himself, was obviously stunned. He looked at the fat man with an incredulous expression, and then it gradually turned into a touch of mockery. "Hey, isn't this His Highness the Ninth Prince? What a rare guest." The corners of his mouth rose slightly, and the smile spread, but the sharpness in his tone suddenly became sharp. "What are you doing here?" Xianyuan Wushang seemed a little embarrassed, but then he calmed down and subconsciously moved closer to Li Dongqing, finally standing next to him. During the whole process, Li Dongqing did not guard against him at all, and let him come closer. Wisps of clear light lit up on Xianyuan Wushang's body, and then it enveloped Li Dongqing's body. In an instant, Li Dongqing's sword qi became more and more stable, and his consumed physical strength rose wildly. In an instant he returned to his peak state. "You still dare to fight? Xianyuan Wushang, are you tired of living?" Xianyuan Samsara's voice suddenly became incomparably sinister. Xianyuan Wushang looked at him expressionlessly. "Do you really want to die? Don't put on airs with me, Ninth Prince. This isn't the space-time corridor." "Indeed, this isn't the space-time corridor, but it seems like you can't deal with me. Do you want Master to send someone else? Or Master himself? If I can die under his sword, I'll be very honored. But do you really want war so much? This prince here represents the space-time corridor. Come, try and touch me." Xianyuan Samsara gritted his teeth. "Scoundrel. We're not enemies. It's just a coincidence that I'm here. I'm not a terrorist, and I have no interest in this place. I'm only here to solve a problem. It's just that there's an accident now, so I see this face." "Solve a problem?" Xianyuan Samsara raised his eyebrows. "Something happened to His Majesty?" Xianyuan Wushang snorted coldly, and began to heal the injuries of everyone from the Sword Dynasty behind Li Dongqing. He didn't need to worry about anything here. Even if something went wrong, it was the War God's realm's problem. What did it have to do with him? Isn't it because of Master? My big brother touched the sword energy that Master left behind. F***ck. Xianyuan Samsara was dumbfounded. "Are you kidding me? Anyway, it's a bit complicated. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be here." Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. From the space-time corridor to the War God's realm, the difficulty wasn't the distance. Under normal circumstances, they could indeed contact each other, but it was impossible for them to meet in the North Sea. If it wasn't for Qin Weibai's consciousness space being too magical, he wouldn't be here at all. Tisk. Xianyuan Samsara's tone was a bit strange. That His Majesty must be having a headache now. He glanced at Li Dongqing, who was frowning. At present, in terms of combat power, this person is stronger than the one next to him, his father, but he obviously didn't feel anything. So, how did His Majesty do it? "I had an accident here." Xianyuan Wushang was still calm and said thoughtfully, "It's not necessarily a headache. Maybe it's an opportunity. But when the time comes, we should ask Master or Master's wife for help." "That's no problem," Xianyuan Samsara solemnly promised without any hesitation. "If you need anything, just say it. There's no need to be stingy in this regard. But when the time comes, just be prepared to bleed a lot." Xianyuan Wushang nodded and fell silent. Xianyuan Samsara also fell silent. The two looked at each other for a moment. Xianyuan Samsara took the initiative to say, "Why aren't you leaving?" "I want to leave too." Xianyuan Wushang's expression was a bit tragic. But how? What do you mean? Xianyuan Samsara narrowed his eyes. I don't know. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. No, I know, but I forgot. Xianyuan Samsara took a deep look at him and nodded. I understand. What do you say here? The little guy wants to fight with his life on the line. He might not be his match here. Xianyuan Wushang suddenly smiled somewhat playfully. He's already at that level. There are some things I should be able to say. In fact, the existence of the North Sea is still meaningful. I came here to protect the North Sea and to protect Li Dongcheng. His mentality has been problematic for a long time. The last two people in the North Sea must stay. This can be regarded as a bit of Li Dongcheng's obsession. He's completely crazy now. If he really destroys the North Sea, he won't have the motivation to live. When the time comes, his only choice is to self-destruct. If he really destroys himself, my master and his majesty in the imperial palace will be heartbroken. So I came here. Just like how we appeared beside his majesty, we are all guides. You've worked hard. Xianyuan Wushang nodded with a gratified expression. Xianyuan Samsara felt a little strange. No matter how he thought about it, it didn't seem right. What does this expression mean? Aha! Xianyuan Wushang smiled without saying anything. Li Dongqing's potential had already been affirmed. Because of the existence of his parents, he didn't need to be explained in any aspect. If Li Dongqing continued to grow, he would at least be a killing god at his peak. Because of his parents, it was unknown whether Li Dongqing would stay here when the time came. Xianyuan Wushang now really felt like someone else was helping his family cultivate a talent. Let's start the show. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. Let's see how to protect the North Sea and how to convince this little guy. Who is it? Li Dongqing's voice suddenly sounded. He didn't feel anything strange. While Xianyuan Wushang and Xianyuan Samsara were chatting, everything was speeding up. Although the two had said a lot, in the eyes of everyone else, it was less than a second. Feeling the recovery of his strength, Li Dongqing's tone seemed to have become somewhat gentle. Xianyuan Samsara's voice sounded. You can call him uncle. He's father's friend. Li Dongqing suddenly narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? It's literally what I mean. Xianyuan Samsara shook his head. Your Majesty, there are a lot of things that you don't understand now. I should be able to tell you some of them now. In fact, there is no such thing as. The corner of Xianyuan Samsara's mouth was still moving. But all his voice suddenly disappeared in an instant. Li Dongqing's eyes flashed with doubt. In the next second, Xianyuan Samsara's face suddenly changed. His face quickly turned pale. The moment he suddenly closed his mouth, a wound suddenly appeared between his eyebrows. A scarlet drop of blood that reflected almost all the light flowed directly from between his eyebrows. Xianyuan Wushang's face suddenly changed. He subconsciously waved his hand, and a clear light enveloped Xianyuan Samsara, quickly healing his injury. What's going on? Li Dongqing raised his eyebrows inexplicably. That's about it. Xianyuan Samsara smiled bitterly. I want to tell you something, but I can't say it. It's not that I don't want to say it, but even if I say it, you can't hear it. Even if I write it on paper, you can't see it. Li Dongqing fell silent. At that moment, he could tell whether Xianyuan Samsara was pretending or not. Xianyuan Samsara obviously wanted to say something and said something. The fat man next to him could obviously hear it, but he couldn't. And the shape of Xianyuan Samsara's mouth was also distorted in an instant. He glanced at Xianyuan Wushang. I can't say it either. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. Only when I reach the peak level can I hear the voice. But he's right, I'm indeed father's friend. I saw some interesting scenes. North Sea's Mount Dibbing was cut open by a sword, right? I've been there, so I should know. As for the current North Sea, no one cares whether these two people are killed or not, but it doesn't matter. Father is now. All the voices disappeared in an instant. At this moment, Li Dongqing clearly felt an abrupt, but incomparably dense killing intent suddenly form around him. However, before that killing intent could envelop Xianyuan Wushang, a seven-colored light instantly enveloped his body. Xianyuan Wushang's figure quickly disappeared. Darkness, light, and countless chaotic scenes constantly flashed. Blood. Flesh splattered. Xianyuan Wushang became a skeleton again. His skeleton was covered in dense cracks, and countless amounts of golden liquid flowed out little by little from the cracks of his bones. The messy light stabilized again. The crown appeared in Xianyuan Wushang's sight once again. The crown was slowly shrinking. Xianyuan Wushang froze on the spot. After a long silence, he seemed to understand something. He raised his hand and waved it gently. His weak consciousness directly formed a very strange experimental platform in front of him. There was a very small tube on the experimental platform. A drop of water flowed out of the tube, and eventually became a bubble. Her consciousness became clear from blurry. It was as if there were countless rays of light constantly moving away and then drawing closer. The moment her consciousness appeared, she didn't know where she was or who she was. It was as if she had just woken up after thousands of years of sleep. She was confused and slow. She felt that she was walking forward. Walking in the pitch-black wilderness, there was not a single trace of light. Some pictures gradually appeared in her mind, as if different people were saying different things. Gu Xianyan Qin Weibai, Li Tianlan Dongcheng Huangtu Gu Xingyun Xianyuan, Li Dongcheng. All the experiences seemed to be completely connected, but in no order. The pictures began to become clear, forming different things one after another, but the order became more and more chaotic. She didn't know which thing happened first, and which thing happened later. She began to think about the order, and then she thought about the time. One thing after another, in an utterly confused sequence, led to different results. But no matter how it developed, people were always the most vivid in her memory. So what was the meaning of time and order? She moved cautiously in the darkness without any light, allowing countless images to flash through her mind. After a long time, she suddenly stopped for a moment and began to think about a very important question. Who am I? There seemed to be a lot of people in her memory. But where was the me in her memory? Was it Gu Xiannen? Was it Qin Weibai? Was it Li Tianlan? Was it Dongcheng Huangtu? Was it who am I? There seemed to be no place for her in all the memories. She suddenly felt a little irritable and angry. There was a little light in the distance. The light was getting bigger and more obvious, rushing toward her at an extreme speed. There seemed to be a figure flashing in the light, getting closer and closer to her. She saw an illusory vague shadow that seemed to dissipate at any time, coming toward her with endless light. She instinctively wanted to fight back. At the moment when she thought about it, countless lights completely enveloped the shadow. The shadow became more and more illusory, but it kept moving forward. She became more and more annoyed. She had just woken up, and her mood was extremely unstable. She instinctively wanted to control the light to kill the other party. A speck of golden light suddenly appeared in the colorful light. The moment the golden light and the light completely merged, she suddenly felt an unparalleled familiarity. The shadow seemed to appear beside her in an instant. The familiar feeling became clearer and clearer. She watched the other party stretch out his palm toward her, so she took a step back. The light under her control instantly shrouded her. The faint shadow disappeared. She herself was wrapped in endless light as she continued to fall, until the deepest part of nothingness. The eternal silence passed slowly, as if it was meaningless. The sound of the slight collision of machinery suddenly sounded. She seemed to open her eyes from a deep sleep. There was darkness in front of her. The extreme darkness was slowly thinning. A little hazy and pure clear light lit up. She blinked, and the memory in her mind was very clear. It was the moment when Xianyuan blade pierced Wang Tianzong's chest. She took a step forward in a daze, subconsciously trying to get close to the clear light in the darkness. The clear light gradually became clear, and it seemed to be a transparent bubble that looked very big but very small. The bubbles spread all the way from a distance, and there were more and more of them. She hesitated and slowly walked in the direction where the bubbles drifted from. There were more and more clear lights, and the surroundings became brighter and brighter. A shining test bench gradually appeared in front of her. The test bench seemed to be operating by itself. She hesitated for a moment, and continued to move forward. The test bench became clearer and clearer. The test bench shining with bronze luster looked old and mottled, with a strong breath of time. In front of the test bench, There was an illusory shadow that seemed to disappear completely at any time. The shadow was so illusory that she could not see its facial features, or even its complete body. It kept busy in front of the test bench, and one bubble after another flew out of the test bench. She looked at it for a long time, and then said softly, "Okay?" "Okay." The shadow responded softly. In the dark space, Xianyuan Wushang saw the crown getting closer and closer to him, and finally stopped in front of the test bench. Different perspectives, different scenes. In the eyes of the crown, the skeleton in front of him was just a shadow that would disappear at any time. In the eyes of the skeleton, the Qin Weibai he wanted to find was just this crown. What was the essence? It was what all of them had been pursuing. "What are you doing?" In the darkness, she looked at the test bench and the shadow curiously and asked softly. "Waiting." The shadow laughed softly. The countless bubbles around seemed to disappear completely. Only the test bench continued to be busy. A drop of liquid flowed out of the test bench, and then gradually expanded. Qin Weibai seemed to want to ask something, but when she saw the water drop getting bigger and bigger, she subconsciously stopped asking and just focused on the drop of water that was getting bigger and bigger. The drop of water seemed to be filled with countless airflows, and began to expand, becoming rounder and more perfect. Infinite density. In silence, the shadow stared at the drop of water in front of him and said softly, "It's expanding, and its density is beginning to become thinner." Countless airflows gradually turned into starry light spots. The light spots began to merge into the drop of water little by little. Electrons, photons, neutrinos. The shadow continued to speak, and all kinds of light continued to merge into it. The drop of water began to expand faster, became the size of a fingernail, and then further spread. Its shape seemed to become rounder and rounder, and finally became a bubble again. There were more and more different lights. The shadow's voice also became more and more erratic. Atoms, nuclei, molecules, countless lights joined the drop of water again. The drop of water expanded to the size of a palm. She watched and listened carefully. The drop of water kept expanding, becoming the size of a head, a house, and a tall building. It expanded infinitely, covering the whole world. It was getting faster and faster. Qin Weibai didn't even know where the bubble had spread to. She and the shadow were completely wrapped in the bubble, and the transparent arc of the bubble had disappeared in the distance. But her instinct told her that the bubble was still expanding infinitely. "There are more and more particles." The shadow's voice was a little dreamy. The starry light spots appeared around Qin Weibai again. They hovered in different places. They were unimaginably big in Qin Weibai's eyes. But in this expanding bubble, it seemed incomparably small, like a speck of dust. The starry light spots became more and more numerous. Qin Weibai's eyes were bright. The bubble suddenly became clear. All the edges seemed to begin to shrink and collapse. In her sight, the bright starry spots began to die out one by one. "Say," the shadow whispered, "if these tiny lights are conscious, how desperate must they be now?" His voice was very soft, but with absolute cruelty. Qin Weibai looked at it blankly and didn't speak. The infinitely large bubble shrank back at a very fast speed. Bang! The bubble turned into a drop of water. The drop of water suddenly exploded again. There was nothingness. Most of the starry light spots disappeared. Only a limited number of light spots were still shining. Qin Weibai quietly looked at those tenacious light spots, and suddenly there was a sincere joy and hope in her heart. The water droplets that exploded into nothingness turned into the most basic particles. The basic particles began to combine, and turned into water droplets again. The water droplets turned into bubbles again, and began to expand infinitely again. The shadow watched all this quietly, and the whole shadow exuded a kind of desolation that was close to despair. "Is it interesting?" he asked softly. Qin Weibai bit her lip tightly and shook her head subconsciously. She didn't find it interesting. She only felt a kind of unprecedented fear. The bubble shrank wildly and exploded again. In the nothingness, there were still a few shining light spots. But Qin Weibai was not sure if these light spots were the ones she had seen earlier. Water droplets, bubbles, expansion, contraction, explosion. It was a never-ending cycle. In this dark space, The constant repetition seemed to be the true eternity. Can you understand it? The shadow asked softly. Qin Weibai shook her head. Do you find it familiar? The shadow asked again. Qin Weibai wanted to shake her head, but all her movements stopped where she was. She did not shake her head or nod. Instead, she fell silent. I understand. Xianyuan Wushang sighed softly. In fact, there was no need for communication. There was never a need for communication. He was sure of Qin Weibai's current state and understood the treatment plan for Li Tianlan. The bubbles exploded and expanded, over and over again, endlessly repeating the cycle. What do you want to do here? Qin Weibai asked. The main purpose of my coming here is to do this experiment and determine whether I can understand it or not. Now that he had gotten the answer, whether Qin Weibai understood it or not, his trip was worthwhile. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, I should go. Who is it? Qin Weibai stared at the test bench in front of her and asked cautiously. Leave the test bench here. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, I can study it when I'm bored. Who is it? Xianyuan Wushang asked again. Xianyuan Wushang murmured in a low voice. Or we are just a group of poor wretches struggling in despair to survive. His shadow floated up gently and went further and further away. The test bench was still working. The bubble expanded infinitely and turned into a world. Xianyuan Wushang's murmur echoed between heaven and earth. Life is the greatest illusion. 10,000 word chapter. Chapter 1033. The darkness was slowly retreating, dissipating at a very slow speed. The surrounding space gradually became illusory. Xianyuan Wushang kept retreating. All the colorful light disappeared the moment Qin Weibai spoke. His body gradually became real, and flesh and blood began to appear on his pale skeleton. More and more flesh and blood formed his limbs and facial features. A seemingly harmless fat man appeared at the end of his consciousness. Xianyuan Wushang sighed and took a step forward. The depth of his consciousness was behind him. The bedroom of the palace master of Emperor Dong's palace was right in front of him. Everything around him seemed to be illusory. The world shone with different colors, and everything in sight seemed to have turned into numbers. Countless numbers formed densely packed data. Xianyuan Wushang raised his head. Everything in his sight was like a three-dimensional virtual world. Except for himself, everything else had become all kinds of data. The depth of his consciousness and the bedroom of the palace master stood face to face in front of him. Xianyuan Wushang slowly turned around and walked in another direction. Countless data around him slowly changed as he moved. It seemed that he was calculating something. Xianyuan Wushang calmly began to combine strings of data. His body was now pure thinking and consciousness. Consciousness and data had completed the initial integration, forming a thinking network in the virtual world that could communicate with the outside world at the fastest speed. His thinking continued to extend. Xianyuan Wushang's figure crazily shuttled back and forth in the virtual world at an infinite speed. The depth of his consciousness and the bedroom of the palace master instantly flew away. The surroundings became eternal darkness and silence again. Xianyuan Wushang's expression was extremely calm. The thinking network seemed to be constantly extending in an infinite space. His consciousness was extremely fast. It kept moving forward, but it also seemed to be motionless. When the space was large to a certain extent, there was no relative reference. Even if it was absolute speed, the situation seemed to be static. The world was originally quiet. His mind shuttled back and forth in the darkness. After an unknown period of time, the virtual dark world completely disappeared. Xianyuan Wushang's mind fluctuated. Finally, he felt a faint but extremely stable network signal. What appeared in front of him was a virtual network base station. It was a node in the space-time corridor quantum network system. Through the quantum network, his consciousness could be projected to any place in the space-time corridor in the shortest time possible. Xianyuan Wushang's consciousness touched the network signal. In the next second, countless chaotic images flashed before his eyes. Xianyuan Wushang's vision blurred, and his consciousness turned into a projection, appearing in a large hall. It might not be accurate to call it a hall, but it was absolutely correct. This was really a hall, but it was a hall so vast that it exceeded the limits of everyone's imagination. One after another, pillars so thick that they could almost support the entire world were arranged neatly, supporting the dome that had no end in sight when one looked up. Above the dome that was so far away that one could barely see the end of it. Above the dome that was a little dazzling, the light shone into the hall. The light was misty and warm, and the space on the left and right was boundless, as if there was no end at all. One after another, figures that looked small but had extremely terrifying auras sat in the corners of the hall. They were very far away from each other. Everyone was suppressing their own auras, but the energy that naturally overflowed from their bodies tore through space uncontrollably, making the entire hall look blurry. As far as Xianyuan Wushang could remember, this was the 4th time he had come here. Every time he attended a meeting here, his heart would be in turmoil. This was the center of power in the space-time corridor. It was where all the higher-ups held their meetings. The Apex Hall. The design of the Apex Hall looked like a very regular cube, with a length of 0.01 light-years. 3 real young stars were burning above the dome, and the energy of the stars continuously replenished the Apex Hall. There was nothing extra in the hall, but almost everything that appeared here represented a part of the Apex Hall's history. To be able to attend a meeting here, one needed not only status, but also strength, status, and responsibility. Xianyuan Wushang was the 9th prince of the space-time corridor. His status and strength were enough to be here, but before this, except for some special occasions, he didn't have enough status or responsibility, so he had only been here 3 times. But now he had become Li Tianlan's guide. Whether it was status or responsibility, Xianyuan Wushang was already qualified to have a seat here that belonged to him for a long time. His heart was in turmoil. Xianyuan Wushang was silent. He bowed slightly to the various figures wrapped in the distorted space in all directions. His voice was very calm. Everyone, I am Xianyuan Wushang. Please take care of me in the future. Everyone knew his name. But before this, everyone called him the 9th prince. But now he had his own name here. A clear and steady voice rang out within the range of 0.01 light-years. It was not loud, not noisy, and seemed to be ringing in one's ears. Take care of each other. Xianyuan Wushang slowly turned around and looked at the central seat of the Apex Hall. Compared to the figures around him, which seemed a little distorted because of the power, there was a soft but incomparably real golden light on the seat of the host. Everything seemed to be contained in that golden light. No one could look directly at it, no one could probe it, and no one could offend it. It was incomparable majesty and momentum, like the entire world. Father. Xianyuan Wushang bowed deeply, his voice respectful and calm. Sit. A deep and steady voice rang out from the host's seat. A piece of nanoparticles extended from the void in front of Xianyuan Wushang. The nanoparticles slowly assembled, turning into a seat of the same specifications as the other seats. Wushang, how is His Majesty doing? As soon as Xianyuan Wushang sat down, a voice rang out beside him. The so-called beside was actually extremely far away in the range of light years. But at this time, everyone's aura was completely connected, so the voice was extremely clear, and the distance was meaningless. Countless eyes were focused on Xianyuan Wushang. Li Tianlan. This was the only important thing in this meeting. Everyone knew that His Majesty, who was in a strange state in Miracle City, was in a very serious problem, but not many people knew what the problem was. He sensed and reincarnated the sword chi that War God's realm used to cut Miracle City. Although he didn't succeed, he suffered a very strong backlash. If it wasn't for the protection of the real brand, I'm afraid he would have to start all over again. The Apex Hall suddenly fell silent. Time passed slowly. After an unknown amount of time, an incredulous female voice slowly said, I saw the whole process of Miracle City being cut. Although War God wasn't at his peak, he was still a rare expert. To feel that sword chi, he had to be at least at Heaven's End, but His Majesty couldn't have reached that level in Miracle City. There are many reasons, but the cause was my mistake. Xianyuan Wushang's voice was low. The guardian I brought there made a move. Although he was very careful, he still changed something, and that sword chi also showed a little bit. Moreover, King Wei was always by His Majesty's side. At that time, King Wei was on His Majesty's body, and His Majesty had the real brand. Although it was very weak, I think both His Majesty and King Wei sensed something the moment the sword chi appeared. After a pause he continued. This was my mistake. No one accused him of anything. They accepted Xianyuan Wushang and gave him a seat, so he was a true colleague. Just as Xianyuan Wushang said to Qin Weibai, they were a group of pitiful people struggling in despair to survive. Pitiful people, lonely souls. No matter what, in the current situation, there might be external battles in the time corridor, but the internal higher-ups had no energy to plot anything. Since they were on the same side, the mistakes of colleagues were their own mistakes. It's not necessarily a bad thing. A calm voice rang out. The three young stars above the palace instinctively trembled. Xianyuan Wushang immediately understood that it was the voice of country guarding Duke. It's just a little troublesome. An incomparably cold voice rang out, and it was filled with wanton killing intent. The space in the Apex Palace trembled slightly, and the War King's voice continued to ring out. His killing intent and battle intent continued to surge. Your Majesty has accidentally touched that sword chi. The location of Miracle City might be exposed very soon. The two sides have been searching for Miracle City's location. If they find anything, they will definitely take action. Miracle City is the ancestral land, and its importance is self-evident. The one who will act this time may be an apocalypse. That's impossible. On the main seat, the golden light slowly said, we can sense each other's apocalypse. Unless they really want to start a full-scale war, the apocalypse will not act. War God's realm killed an apocalypse not long ago, and with Miracle City, it may be an opportunity for them to start a war. Country guarding Duke's voice sounded a little solemn. The golden light flickered slightly, and an extremely calm voice came from the light. No, if Miracle City is exposed, the one who will act will at most be an apostle. Apostles were also important figures worthy of everyone's attention, and they could be said to be the strongest in group battles among those of the same level. There was no one else. Not to mention an apostle, even Xianyuan Wushang, who had countless auxiliary abilities but was the weakest among those of the same level, could cause devastating damage to Miracle City if he disregarded the consequences. It's fine, Xianyuan Wushang said in a low voice. If it's just an apostle, the guardian and I can stop them. The voice in the golden light sounded again. I will contact the palace and cover the location of Miracle City again. The surging aura of War King calmed down. The incomparably calm voice, which could make the stars tremble with every sentence, sounded again. How is Her Highness's situation? Her true imprint is second only to His Majesty. How is her condition? Xianyuan Wushang frowned and suddenly said, how long have I been in the depths of Her Highness's consciousness? Time is meaningless. Country guarding Duke said softly. The country guarding Duke said softly. If you must calculate, it has been about 400 years since you entered the depths of Her Highness's consciousness. Note this is your time. Here it is 2 hours. 400 years, 400 years. Xianyuan Wushang frowned even more. Her Highness's true imprint is still transforming, but the transformation is beyond expectations. There is already a trace of the embryonic form of the eternal furnace in the depths of her consciousness. I went to the other half of Miracle City in the depths of her consciousness, and saw Xianyuan reincarnation. Xianyuan reincarnation? The country guarding Duke raised his eyebrows slightly. The chief disciple of the god of war? Yes. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. He's Li Dongqing's guide. I saw the first meeting between Xianyuan Luanhui and Li Dongqing, but I'm not sure if what I saw is happening or if it's already in the past. Time is meaningless. The country guarding Duke repeated again and suddenly laughed. Whether in the space-time corridor or the war god's realm, Xianyuan reincarnation, the first disciple of the war god, is known as the first celestial end. The war god values him very much. He became Li Dongqing's guide. Is this because he is afraid that the space-time corridor will snatch him in the future? There was a burst of laughter in the summit hall. Everyone felt that this matter was interesting. Only the golden light on the main seat remained calm. Go on. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. The time I went was too coincidental. I am not sure if it was a real coincidence, or Her Highness's true imprint was guiding me. If it was the latter, it means that Her Highness's true imprint has shown signs of recovery. But obviously, Her Highness's will is still chaotic under my test. If you want His Majesty to recover in the most perfect state, it will take time. We need to wait for Her Highness's true imprint to recover. It will take a long time. 100 years, 200 years, or even longer is possible. This is the real time of Miracle City. It is meaningful. No one could refute this. Everyone knew what the real time of hundreds of years meant to Li Tianlan. Miracle City's definition of strength is very interesting. They divide different strengths and use a very abstract word, realm. Qi controlling realm, ice condensing realm, fire flaming realm, thunder shocking realm, and invincible realm. This seems to be the top combat capability of Miracle City at present. There is no clear division of realms for people who have surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. In addition, there is another division that does not count as a realm, the chosen one. That is the invincible realm. They call it the supreme realm, but there is still no clear name of the realm. In my opinion, the supreme realm is equivalent to completely getting rid of the limitations of the invincible realm. It is not surpassing the peak of the invincible realm, but truly entering a new level. To be precise, the peak strength of the chosen one should be equivalent to 3 to 4. 5 levels of authority. His Majesty may be able to break the limit of 5 levels, but not too much. Good Lord, 5 levels of authority. Isn't that really invincible? If the battlefield is limited to Miracle City, even Heaven's End realm may not be his opponent. What level was His Majesty at when he left Miracle City? Warlord's roaring laughter rang out. 7 levels of authority. In the golden light of the main seat, a steady voice rang out. With His Majesty's potential, this data is very likely to be equaled. When I arrived at Miracle City, His Majesty was engaged in a battle. I can be sure that His Majesty has touched the order in some aspects, but his martial arts is still his main foundation. And don't forget, King Wei has always been by his side. In this case, once he reaches the peak strength of Miracle City, with King Wei in hand, it is almost equivalent to having the power of the 5th level of authority. You know what the 5th level of authority of Miracle City means. Go on. The voice in the golden light was steady and without any fluctuation. His Majesty's current combat strength is close to the limit of Miracle City, but this kind of strength also has flaws. His physical strength has not kept up with the current combat strength. If the true imprint in the depths of His Majesty's consciousness is completely awakened, then this problem can indeed be solved, but His Majesty's true imprint is only showing signs of awakening. Everyone, we can't wait too long. So I think that the current secondary method is the best one. We have no way to use His Majesty's true imprint to recreate a real body for His Majesty, so we can only use conventional treatment methods to heal him and make up for the lack of physical strength. As for what we want, His Majesty's physical condition, there will always be a chance in the future. But if we do this, His Majesty's future progress will be slower. A hesitant voice rang out. Moreover, King Wei has always been with His Majesty. With him, His Majesty's physical strength doesn't need to worry too much. If we use the second method, the price we need to pay is too high. We have no way to calculate the real time and His Majesty's time here. In fact, if we wait for the true imprint in the depths of His Majesty's consciousness to awaken, it will take at least 100 or 200 years of real time. At that time, all aspects of His Majesty's body will truly become perfect, and he will be able to enter the killing god level without any reservations. But 100 or 200 years, none of us can be sure what will happen during this period of time. For this plan, the only thing we can do now is to wait. If we use the second method, His Majesty will immediately wake up. Our treatment doesn't need to be thorough. While making up for his physical strength, we will deliberately leave some flaws. When His Majesty's true imprint recovers in the future, we will make up for these flaws. But the price is that after His Majesty leaves Miracle City with His Majesty, there will be no real time. The process of His Majesty's true imprint's recovery will be delayed for an unknown period of time, which will delay His Majesty's advancement. We don't know how long this will take. At the same time, We need to pay an extremely rare truth potion to make up for His Majesty's true injuries. I admit that the price is high, but this is the only way, Xianyuan Wushang said slowly. Xianyuan Wushang said slowly. We all know that no one can afford to waste such a rare moment of real time. There was silence. After a long time, an unfamiliar voice, which had been silent, rang out. His Majesty's injury came from War God. The atmosphere became more and more silent. Even Xianyuan Wushang didn't know what to say for a moment. The one who spoke was the first prince, who was also Xianyuan Wushang's elder brother. His tone was full of bitterness. The war god of the war god realm. He had only left Miracle City for a few hundred years. But after getting rid of the real time in Miracle City, no one knew how long had passed in his war god realm. Time was meaningless. No one could be sure for thousands of years. The two from Human Emperor Palace and War God Realm also rose from insignificance to stand at the top. Decades ago in real time, War God personally separated Miracle City. The tacit consent of Time Corridor was equivalent to recognition of the status of War God Realm and Human Emperor Palace. At that time, War God was already a top expert. The sword chi he left at that time was now touched by Li Tianlan, and then caused real injuries. Then, in the case that Time Corridor couldn't activate Qin Weibai's true imprint, they could only pay a truth potion whose level could not be lower than that of War God to save Li Tianlan. Save Li Tianlan? Time Corridor didn't have such an option. To save Li Tianlan, they had to pay such a precious potion. Such a potion represented that it was close to the level of War God decades ago. That was to say, if it could save Li Tianlan, it could also save an expert close to the level of War God. How many such experts could there be in the whole Time Corridor? This even meant that the lives of the future His Majesty or several lords were used to save Li Tianlan. Of course, they had to save him. But the price was too high. Time Corridor was ahead of War God Realm and Human Emperor Palace in many technologies. But in terms of potions, War God Realm and Human Emperor Palace had been studying for countless years. In this respect, they were ahead of Time Corridor. Time Corridor also had this kind of potion that could make up for real injuries. But to make up for Li Tianlan's level of potion, if Time Corridor wanted to save his life, they had to either spend unimaginable resources to gamble on a bottle, or they had to put down their pride and spend a small but still massive amount of resources to ask War God Realm for a bottle. This was a very difficult thing for everyone. War God and His Majesty have a relationship, maybe. When he left Miracle City, the Li family didn't exist yet. Their relationship had faded. At least we can talk to each other. Silly, Time Corridor needs to talk to others? What do you think we are? Ridiculous self-esteem. How can we not bow our heads when we need help? All right. A steady voice sounded in the golden light. A crystal bottle without any luster suddenly floated out of the golden light, and finally fell in front of Xianyuan Wushang. There were a few drops of completely transparent liquid in the crystal bottle. They looked like a few drops of pure water. There was nothing unusual about them. This is the latest achievement of War God Realm. I fought with Lin Xianyuan some time ago, and he lost to me. Xianyuan Wushang was stunned. In the Summit Palace, War King snorted coldly. There was only one His Majesty in the Time Corridor, and he was fully deserving of being the strongest. Other than that, the strongest was War King, the King of War. It could be said that he was truly above tens of thousands of people. War God Lin Xianyuan of War God Realm did come to Time Corridor some time ago, but the first person he challenged was not His Majesty, but War King. The Battle King had lost. He had lost countless resources. And His Majesty won. He won this bottle of medicine. In this way, it was equivalent to the Time Corridor paying a huge amount of resources in exchange for this bottle of medicine. War King was a little depressed, but there was nothing he could say. That's it. His Majesty in the golden light said softly, then suddenly asked, how is King Wei's condition? It's still in a split state, but King Wei's core seems to have been contaminated to some extent. King Wei's body still retains a pure will, but his core desperately yearns for freedom. If it wasn't for his core, His Majesty might not have touched that sword chi. Contaminated? An extremely sharp sword light suddenly flashed in the hall. Order or shadow? I can't be sure at the moment, but His Majesty can solve this matter. As he spoke, he finally reached out and took the medicine in front of him. His Majesty grunted. He seemed to want to say something, but when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he suddenly moved his mouth and grunted with a raised tone. Beep. An ear-piercing voice rang out in the Apex Palace without any warning. Warning, warning. High-frequency energy vibration detected. Data matching in progress. Data matching completed. Space fragmentation detected. Compatibility 100%. Warning. Warning. Peak energy source detected. Alignment analysis in progress. Analysis complete. Alignment neutral. Everyone's body slightly relaxed. The shrill warning faded away, but the sound of the notification still echoed in the Summit Palace. Peak energy source detected. Matching target. Human Emperor. Similarity 57%. God of War. Similarity 99. 7%. Target confirmed. God of War. Analyzing target's existence form. Analysis complete. Target is Sword Chi projection. Communication signal detected. Countless notifications became softer and softer. On the main seat of the Summit Palace, the golden light jumping became more and more real. His Majesty's voice rang out from the golden light. Open the door and welcome the guest. Silently, a huge vortex appeared in a certain direction of the Apex Palace. The huge vortex swallowed all the light and surrounding matter the moment it appeared. The vortex became stable in the shortest time possible. A slowly rotating black hole slowly extended from the void, until it reached the wormhole that had suddenly appeared in the distance. A sword light that almost illuminated the lonely void appeared from the wormhole, and entered the black hole in an instant. The sword beam shuttled through the black hole, and finally landed at the singularity in the deepest part of the black hole. The light of the star shone on the singularity inside the black hole. The incomparably bright and resplendent sword light transformed into a figure that looked extremely young. In the Summit Palace, everyone except His Majesty stood up and nodded. Your Majesty, God of War. The war god, who looked extremely young, nodded slightly. The sword light that contained boundless energy surrounded him like a dense fog, enveloping him from head to toe. I'm here to deliver something. The projection of the divine god of battle raised his hand. A bottle of medicine similar to the one His Majesty had just given Xianyuan Wushang appeared and slowly floated in front of him. The real golden light paused for a moment. This is exactly what we need. His Majesty's voice was calm. What resources does the war god realm want? Forget about resources. He and I are family. It's not a loss to save him once. The voice of the god of war was clear and indifferent, but there was a hint of toughness in his words. Perhaps he had slowed down his tone, but his habitual words carried an indescribable kind of strength. Family. The war king's deep voice suddenly sounded, as if he was roaring. Lin Xianyuan, what do you think our Majesty is? He is indeed using your 24 moves of sword now, but do you really think you deserve to be the ancestor of His Majesty? The projection of the god of war slowly turned around, and looked in the direction of the war king, remaining silent. The atmosphere in the Summit Palace suddenly became oppressive. The smell of gunpowder was getting stronger and stronger in the air. Xianyuan Wushang subconsciously touched the medicine in front of his chest, a little nervous. The god of war of the war god realm, Lin Xianyuan. Just like his father, people at their level, be it in the space-time corridor, or the war god realm's mortal palace, were fully deserving of their status as legends. For countless years, the time-space corridor had become more and more stable. The war god realm had gradually become low-key, and the human emperor was at the most critical moment. Under such circumstances, the god of war of the war god realm had almost become the most powerful card of the human race. Strong, cruel, iron-blooded, crazy. In the time-space corridor and the war god realm, where there was no real time, the fall of the first doomsday in thousands of years was done by the god of war. Killing the doomsday in a disadvantageous situation, such a battle record could almost be said to be the real peak of martial arts. And everyone remembered the system notification just now. The matching data of the peak energy source showed that the god of war was 99.7%, not 100%. Although there was only a small difference, there was no doubt that the god of war had improved since the last time. He was not a good-tempered person. Even in the order camp and the shadow camp, his domineering strength was well known. Watch your tone, I don't want there to be a next time. The god of war was silent for a while, then said in a calm tone, "The war king's words are too harsh, but not without reason. Your Majesty, your family's words are indeed inappropriate. I know you are strong, but do you really think that His Majesty's temper is better than yours? In the future, when he returns and finds out about your words and actions today, it is destined to be karma again. Not only did you not get the favor, but you also messed up the relationship. Is it not good?" An old voice rang out from the Apex Palace. "Everyone, please don't misunderstand," the god of war said calmly. "I am talking about a family, not inheritance. My daughter admires Li Dongqing very much. After Wushang saw Samsara and we got the news, my daughter took out this bottle of potion from her own quota." Silence reigned. Everyone was a little shocked. This so-called family. Could it be that the god of war was going to marry that His Majesty? Which princess of the war god realm is it? In the golden light, His Majesty's voice had a hint of a smile. "Little six." The god of war shook his head slightly. "Is it the sixth princess?" The smile in His Majesty's tone became more obvious. "They are a good match. Let's see their own fate," the god of war said calmly. "I have another condition." "Please say it," His Majesty said in a deep voice. With this potion, the corridor of time and space was worth agreeing to some of the god of war's requests. "My youngest son needs some training. I'll let the ninth prince take him to Miracle City for a few decades of real time," the god of war said calmly. The corner of Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched fiercely. The youngest son of the god of war. Although he was the youngest son, in fact he was not small at all. He was known as the little god of war. Even in the entire war god realm, he was ranked among the top experts. Wouldn't it be like Mars colliding with Earth to let him go to the Miracle City? Even you can't guide him? Do you still need to do this? His Majesty was a little surprised. "I have taught him everything that needs to be taught. He has his own threshold." The god of war shook his head. "The Miracle City is a good place. He is suitable to die there. Maybe only after experiencing a real death can he break through again. Let Li Tianlan kill him. The war god realm will take care of everything afterward." His Majesty was silent for a while and looked at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang nodded helplessly. "I only hope that your highness can be careful. I just want him to die once. I don't want him to be completely destroyed. He will pay attention to what needs to be paid attention to." In the calm voice of the god of war, his figure gradually dissipated into sword light all over the sky. The sword light rushed out of the pinnacle palace and slowly disappeared. The consciousness of the god of war had returned to the war god realm. His Majesty looked at it silently. Finally he nodded. "That's good." The golden light shone on the main seat and finally disappeared. The pinnacle palace began to become quiet and empty. One by one, the projections gradually dissipated. Xianyuan Wushang touched the potion in his arms and said with a sad face, "It's too difficult for me." No one answered him. He was the only one left in the pinnacle palace. Becoming Li Tianlan's guide, and thus obtaining the qualification to enter the pinnacle palace officially meant that this matter was extremely important. Xianyuan Wushang sighed and closed his eyes. He opened them again the moment he closed them. It was as if time had frozen for a second. Before the words he said when he entered the depths of his consciousness, Qin Weibai's voice sounded. Qin Weibai's voice rang out. "What's wrong with you? What order?" "I'm not crazy really." "Oh naive. Which madman will tell you that he's crazy? I'm not crazy." Chapter 1034. Xianyuan Wushang's misty eyes became extremely clear the moment Qin Weibai's voice sounded. His complete consciousness was still in the process of gradually returning. It started when his body fell softly beside Li Tianlan. Entering the depths of his consciousness, he saw Li Dongqing and Xianyuan Luanhui. The meeting in the Summit Palace. Scenes began to appear one after another. Xianyuan Wushang was not sure how long he had experienced, because time was meaningless. No matter how long it was, in the most real time, it was less than a second. His heart gradually beat. The blood in his body began to speed up. Xianyuan Wushang, who was lying beside Li Tianlan in a very strange posture, and covered with wounds, looked like a dead man, moved slightly. Countless blood began to flow back into his body. His bones healed quickly, and his heartbeat became strong again. The gray color on his face, which was full of a strong sense of death, gradually faded and became ruddy. In the most real environment, Xianyuan Wushang became the most illusory state again. He reached out to hold his head and slowly sat up. Nothing, a little messy. Xianyuan Wushang's voice was a little slow. You just... Qin Weibai's voice was a little hesitant. She was not even sure what had happened just now. Fast. Too fast. She heard the dense sound of bones cracking, saw Xianyuan Wushang fall beside Li Tianlan covered in blood, and saw his face become like a dead body. Everything seemed to happen really, but also like an illusion. She just blinked and received the message in her brain. Xianyuan Wushang had returned to normal. I'm fine. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head hard. Qin Weibai still wanted to say something, but Xianyuan Wushang's words had completely diverted all her attention. I found a way to treat my brother. What? Qin Weibai was stunned, and then her eyes suddenly lit up. What way? This. Xianyuan Wushang reached into his arms and took out a very delicate and small crystal bottle. There were about 10 drops of transparent liquid in the crystal bottle, which was shaking slightly, looking like the purest water. This is... Qin Weibai was a little confused. Sister-in-law, if you trust me, let me use this potion for my brother. In terms of technical level, this thing is many generations more advanced than the immortality potion of the Wang family of Beihai, so it can not only cure my brother's injury, but also repair most of his body's hidden dangers. Xianyuan Wushang said softly. It wasn't easy for my family to obtain this bottle of medicine. He held the potion tightly, and his voice became calmer and calmer. I'm sure. This is the only way to save Big Brother. The key is, do you believe me? Believe it or not. Qin Weibai looked into Xianyuan Wushang's eyes and remained silent for a long time. Li Tianlan's injury was indeed very serious. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he had already fallen. Naylan Shuriying, who represented the highest medical level of this era, expressed that she was powerless. She didn't even mention her third-generation immortality. What this meant was self-evident. Even if Qin Weibai didn't trust Xianyuan Wushang, she had no other choice. The origin of this potion was unknown. At least in Qin Weibai's eyes, Xianyuan Wushang just lay on the bed for a while, and then there was this potion. She didn't know what was in this potion, but in Li Tianlan's current state, whether she believed it or not, Qin Weibai's only choice was to try it. I have no choice. She shook her head gently. I see. Xianyuan Wushang nodded and gently unscrewed the cap. There was nothing unusual. The 10 drops of water were still shaking slightly in the crystal bottle. A glimmer of light appeared in Xianyuan Wushang's hand. The light seeped into the mouth of the bottle. Xianyuan Wushang was feeling the liquid in the bottle with great caution, making the final confirmation. He was a saint. Of course, there was a path above saint. However, in the extremely long time of the space-time corridor, there was no way to continue to promote saint. Not only the space-time corridor, but also the Emperor Palace and the War God realm. Unless the order was completely promoted, saint was already the peak of the human clan. In the real environment of Miracle City, Xianyuan Wushang could use his authority to confirm the effect of this potion. Qin Weibai had no choice but to believe in Xianyuan Wushang. But Xianyuan Wushang didn't dare to completely trust the War God realm. There was an Emperor Palace in the War God realm. But here, there was only the space-time corridor. Although the combined forces and resources of the War God realm and the human Emperor Palace couldn't compare to the space-time corridor, the difference was not that big. Both sides weren't enemies, but strictly speaking, they couldn't be considered friends. They could cooperate and trade, all for the sake of survival. Neither the War God nor the one in the Emperor Palace was a villain, but Li Tianlan was too important to the space-time corridor. No one could afford any accident. Everyone in the space-time corridor was waiting for his return. The war god was also very clear about this. Now, if he really did something to make an accident happen to Li Tianlan, then the space-time corridor could not recover the loss even if it died with the other party. Xianyuan Wushang had no way to describe Li Tianlan's importance to the space-time corridor, but the most basic example was that in order to protect Li Tianlan and let him return in the future, there was no one in the space-time corridor that could not be sacrificed. This key was simply irreplaceable. The reason given by the war god in the Pinnacle Palace was indeed sufficient. But if Li Tianlan's importance to the space-time corridor was taken into account, then the so-called sufficient was not sufficient. The latest true potion developed by the war god realm was indeed very important and precious. Every bottle, or even every drop, represented a huge amount of resources. But in this matter, such a bottle of potion was nothing. The dense clear light analyzed the liquid in the crystal bottle little by little. Xianyuan Wushang nervously observed the liquid in the bottle. In this environment, if the war god had left any backup in the crystal bottle, with his authority, it was almost impossible that he could not find it. The clear light and the clear water vibrated slightly, looking very harmonious. The constantly fluctuating clear light even analyzed every water molecule in the liquid, but found no problem. Xianyuan Wushang breathed a sigh of relief, finally relieved. Then I'll start. He glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai nodded and stared at Xianyuan Wushang's eyes. Sister-in-law, don't worry. Xianyuan Wushang smiled, looking harmless. He turned to face Li Tianlan, holding the crystal bottle in his hand, and directly turned it over. Boom! In the blink of an eye, an extremely loud sound of tide suddenly rang out in the bedroom. The sound of tide rushed out of the bedroom in an instant, echoing over the entire Emperor Dong's palace. More than a dozen drops of liquid in the crystal bottle vibrated violently. In front of Qin Weibai's eyes, there seemed to be endless water directly gushing out of the small crystal bottle. The water was overwhelming, completely enveloping Li Tianlan's figure. Chapter 1035. There was a black ocean rippling in the extreme darkness and nothingness. The ocean was endless, and it kept extending in the endless space. There was no light in the black ocean. The sword energy, which was powerful enough to tear everything apart, gathered into huge waves that could break stars. The indescribable sword energy roared up and down in the void, drowning everything. This should have been a terrifying scene beyond everyone's imagination. But because the black ocean was too big, in the ocean that was measured in light years, even the huge waves that could break stars looked like tiny waves in the ocean. The sword energy filled the void, sweeping away the stars. The planets and stars that originally existed around were all smashed by the sword energy. The black ocean roared and surged, occupying the entire galaxy, like an extremely deep shadow in the starry sky. The silence seemed to be eternal, unchanging. Meaningless time flowed at different speeds. The vast ocean that occupied the entire galaxy was calm and tranquil. 10,000 years had passed on the other side of the ocean, but only one day had passed on this side of the ocean. The surging ocean seemed to be completely still in the endless void, until a glimmer of light suddenly lit up. The faint light showed that it was shining from a huge wave that was hundreds of thousands of meters high, and then it spread quickly in the surrounding sea at the speed of light. It was like a blink of an eye, but also like a long time. The faint light directly covered the entire sea. The constantly undulating huge waves of sword energy slightly stopped. The black ocean instantly became a flat mirror surface. A picture appeared on the sea level. All kinds of huge objects were placed in a disorderly manner, forming a three-dimensional space. A soft but infinitely large sofa. An exaggerated bed that looked like a canopy. A beautiful woman, a harmless fat man, and His Majesty with his eyes closed. The whole picture spanned across the length of light years, and it was all imprinted on the sea. If this picture kept shrinking and looked at according to the scale of a normal person, it would be the picture of the master bedroom of Emperor Dong's palace. The sea was motionless, playing silently. A real water light surged out of the crystal bottle, completely drowning the silent figure lying on the bed. At that moment, An incomparably illusory but extremely ear-piercing whistling sound rang out in the distant void. Without any warning, a void storm appeared at the end of the sea. All sorts of chaotic cosmic rays instantly lit up the void. There was no disguise in the most real and most illusory universe. The whole world was changing. The huge and calm sea reflected Li Tianlan and the surrounding starry sky. Time seemed to be speeding up endlessly. The storm ravaged the stars. A star that was nearing the end of its life suddenly exploded and began to transform into a supernova. A good black hole that was close to the star system began to accelerate and collide with it. The void was gradually shattering, becoming weaker and weaker. The entire world was shaking, and more void storms appeared. Countless storms rushed towards the Sea of Sword Chi. However, before they could even get close, they were completely shattered by the sword chi in the void. A speck of thick darkness suddenly appeared in the void. The darkness was similar to the Black Ocean, but it was also different. It was the same sword energy that kept spreading. The sword chi shuttled over from different constellations and galaxies, shattering the raging storms and gradually approaching the Black Ocean. The ocean surged slightly for a moment. The boundless black sword chi did not merge with the ocean. Instead, it floated upwards and finally stopped above the ocean. It was like a pitch-black vault of heaven. The vault of heaven and the sea were facing each other in the void. The sky was spreading unscrupulously. A hazy and illusory figure that seemed to be about to dissipate at any time spread down silently along the black sword energy in the sky. His voice was steady and calm. "How is it? It has begun." The huge waves on the sea rose against the sky. The figure of War God appeared beside the transparent shadow. The two stood side by side, looking at the reflection of Li Tianlan on the sea below. The War God of the War God realm. The human emperor of the human emperor palace. Ever since they left Miracle City, in the millions of years that they had experienced in the void, the two of them had been watching over each other, advancing and retreating together, exploring the end of this world step by step, the galaxies, the star fields, the entire sea of stars, and finally standing at the peak of the starry sky. The human emperor was the guardian of the War God realm. The War God was also the guardian of the human emperor palace. This relationship had lasted for countless years, and there was no possibility of it being destroyed. "How are you doing?" The War God looked up at the sky above his head and suddenly asked. "Not very good." The shadow of the human emperor sprinkled a little hazy light. He looked down at Li Tianlan on the sea, and his voice was solemn. "I hope there will be a turn for the better this time. Go to the eternal furnace again." The War God frowned. "We entered the eternal furnace together, and came out alive. That's why we are where we are today. If we go again now, it won't work." The human emperor sighed softly, and his eyes were fixed on the sea. He saw the endless water light wrapped around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's body floated up from the bed, and began to emit clear light. The rich clear light almost ignored all the distance in an instant, and directly rushed out of Miracle City. In the blink of an eye, the light penetrated the black sea, penetrated the black sky, and covered the entire sea of stars. The endless void storm became countless times stronger in an instant. There were disasters everywhere. The starry sky seemed to have a consciousness, and was trying its best to search for something, or even to reverse something. The War God waved his hand. The reflection of Li Tianlan was instantly pulled away, farther and farther. In just a second, the bedroom was pulled away and turned into a blue planet. The void around the planet was changing little by little in a way that was so weak that it was almost imperceptible. The sunlight began to refract. As if a switch had been activated, everything that followed would enter an irreversible process. "It has taken root," the War God said in a low voice. He still chose Miracle City. "The war is about to begin." The human emperor's voice was a bit complicated. "On the left is the light of order, and on the right is the shadow of chaos. The reason we can struggle to survive is related to the authority. But just like the battle when you killed the Doomsday, what do you think? It was luck." The War God was silent for a long time before he shook his head. From the moment he killed Doomsday until now, it was the first time they met, and the first time they talked about this topic. He had indeed relied on his own strength to kill an apocalypse from the Order faction. It was partly due to his strength, but it was also due to luck. The neutral faction is at a complete disadvantage against Order. Compared to chaos, Order can be said to be our natural enemy. We, the space-time corridor, and all the living beings of the neutral faction are able to exist until now not only because of our authority. Truth is our strongest weapon. The one known as the strongest of the neutral camp in the time corridor is also the only one who can kill the Doomsday unscathed. His strength is not because of the authority, but also because of the truth. The human emperor looked at Li Tianlan on the sea and said softly, "This one is close to the pure truth. He has now begun to take root in Miracle City and even affected us here. I'm afraid the time corridor has already been turned upside down. Everything in the past is deep enough. Whether it is the Order or the chaos, they don't want to see him return. Everyone will be involved in the fire of war. Under the fire of war, how can there be a paradise? There has never been one." The war god shook his head. Time corridor, the human emperor murmured and suddenly asked, "If you and I join hands, will we be able to defeat His Majesty in the time corridor?" After a pause he added, "A battle of life and death." The war god was silent for a long time. The most likely outcome, he seemed to have calculated many times before he slowly said, "If you and I die, he will be seriously injured. Maybe he will lose more than half of his authority and the real brand." How terrifying, the number one expert. The human emperor's voice was a bit erratic. In this way, the time corridor still has a chance to win this war. At least it can protect Miracle City and drag the war until His Majesty returns. It depends on how determined the Order and the chaos are. And one thing is undeniable, we don't have enough time. So even if we join hands, we won't be able to defeat His Majesty in the time corridor. But as the one in Miracle City returns, the strength of His Majesty will continue to decline. After all, at the very beginning, the one in Miracle City gave his authority to the one in Time Corridor, so that His Majesty can really make up for the shortcomings of Time Corridor and become the so-called master. If he returns, the faster he recovers, the greater the pressure on Time Corridor. In terms of authority, the one in Miracle City should have the highest authority, right? This question is meaningless. God of War shook his head. Your authority is higher than mine, but what's the difference in combat strength? Now, it's most likely that the space-time corridor and Li Tianlan will exchange authorities to touch different paths. This is the most beneficial and convenient way. If you and I die, we can also exchange authorities if there's a chance. Human Emperor nodded thoughtfully. I should go to Time Corridor here. God of War hesitated for a moment. They weren't exactly friends with the space-time corridor. The starry sky was so vast, the so-called friend was actually a meaningless word. Time corridor, Emperor Palace, God of War realm, etc. In this lonely but never lonely starry sky, they were on the same side and could only struggle to survive. Time corridor encountered a battle. When fighting, God of War had to help. In the face of life and death, all grudges had to be put aside. Kill another Doomsday? Human Emperor laughed. Maybe. God of War's voice was a bit erratic. The Doomsday of Order. No matter which one, they represented the peak and limit of combat strength in the starry sky, almost impossible to surpass. Kill another one. God of War thought silently and didn't speak. I will move Emperor Palace and God of War realm. Leave this place to me. Human Emperor said calmly. Although it's not appropriate for me to take action now, it's not impossible if it's really necessary. Nothing will happen here. God of War turned his head and took a deep look at him. The two of them didn't say anything else. They lowered their heads and looked at the reflection on the surface of the sea. The water light with a sense of reality had completely wrapped Li Tianlan's figure. Great rivers, lakes and seas, the water light was endless, entwining Li Tianlan layer by layer, seeping through his skin into his every pore, repairing every wound in his body and even every cell. Extremely weak changes were happening little by little. In their line of sight, they could clearly see that Li Tianlan's body was growing taller little by little, and his eyebrows and eyes were becoming sharper and sharper. This change was so subtle that it was impossible to notice, but in their line of sight, this change was extremely clear and intense. Endless disasters in the starry sky kept happening with Li Tianlan's changes, becoming more and more frequent and violent. The smell of divine weapons. Human Emperor suddenly said. God of War nodded and said, they are indeed exchanging authorities. If we fail this time, we can also try. They are forerunners, and we still have some time to wait for the results. Forerunners, God of War muttered to himself, they always have been. Human Emperor smiled gently. 11 will go to Miracle City this time. This is the condition I negotiated with the space-time corridor. You are his grandfather. Do you need to ask him to take care of your family? God of War suddenly asked. 11 was his youngest son, the 11th prince of God of War realm. His real name was Lin Shi. What's the point? Human Emperor asked. At least it will make you feel better. God of War said lightly. I don't feel uncomfortable. Human Emperor shook his head. And there are some things I still remember. God of War was slightly stunned. Tianzong seems to be good? This generation. Human Emperor shook his head slightly. The two brothers are good, but they have no martial arts in their eyes, so there is no need to deliberately take care of them. In any case, the Wang family of Beihai will always exist. If possible, we can bring Sheng Xiao here. Hao Tian and he can. As for Song Xiai, Ling Xi likes it very much. Ren Huang said calmly. It was obvious that he was starting to talk about his daily life. What about Yuetong? That's not for me to decide. Ha! God of War suddenly laughed. If we go back to the beginning, Yuetong seems to be Qin Weibai's maid, right? At the beginning, she was entangled with Li Tianlan, and later she was driven out by Qin Weibai. At that time, the person who had the best relationship with Yuetong was the mother of the 9th prince in the space-time corridor? You were chased out just because you spoke up for the injustice. Is that true? Human Emperor turned his head and looked helplessly at his close friend who had gone through thick and thin with him for countless years. The so-called relationship was indeed a bit messy. To some extent, God of War could be regarded as his nephew, and from another point of view, God of War could be regarded as his son-in-law. But after so many years, who was who and who was who? What was the relationship between who and who? He shook his head. Are you telling me a story here? I seem to have received some news, but it was very vague. How can you say it clearly? Human Emperor said quietly. What you said is true, but it should be Dongqing Rushi, not Yuetong. There is also a saying that Yuetong and Qin Weibai are the same person, or Dongqing Rushi and Wang Yuetong are both Qin Weibai's disciples. It's a mess. Who is who? How can you say it clearly? We are all lonely souls and wild ghosts, not to mention others, just us. He paused and said softly. Do we really know who we are? God of War was silent. A trace of sadness flashed across his extremely bright eyes. Li Tianlan is Li Tianlan. Even if he returns, he is still Li Tianlan. At the beginning of the research, maybe it was a trap. Human Emperor said slowly. God of War seemed to lose the nature of chatting all of a sudden. He looked down at the Black Sea quietly. After a long time he said slowly, I am me. Human Emperor said yes. Let's go. God of War suddenly said, go to the space-time corridor. Human Emperor's illusory figure, which seemed to dissipate at any time, disappeared silently and returned to the dark sky. On the Black Sea, Li Tianlan's fingers moved slightly and he raised his palm. God of War took a deep look at the scene on the sea. In the next moment, the calm sea surface suddenly shattered. Endless raging waves of sword energy rose and fell. The whole sea was spinning violently. Waves after waves that could break stars roared and surged crazily. The illusory but extremely strong space wall was torn apart in an instant. God of War's figure disappeared. The entire black ocean began to move. Endless black sword energy rushed along the broken space wall to the starry sky at the other end. Who is who? Who am I? This might be the question that troubled every peak expert. After such a long time, God of War was not sure whether he was Lin Xianyuan or not. But the most essential thing would never change. Right now, he was the sea of sword chi that occupied the entire galaxy. This was his most essential form of existence. The surging and mighty sword energy poured into the other end of the broken void. It was like going through a wormhole. The first wave of sword energy that passed through the temporary void passage rushed out. No one knew how many years had passed in the space-time corridor. Countless ear-piercing alarms sounded at the same time. At the very front of the Black Sea, it came from all directions. There was a cold metallic luster everywhere. The void had already disappeared. The sea was surging and the sword energy was overwhelming. The metallic luster had completely covered the void and the stars. In an extremely distant corner, multi-barreled planetary obliteration rapid-fire cannons were firing crazily. Billions of densely packed mechanical armies filled the starry sky. Countless high-tech lights crisscrossed. Further away, there were many spinning wormholes, and countless mechanical life forms were gushing out of them. More and more mechanical life forms were gushing out. Attack. The endless attacks received the order to attack the moment the Black Sea appeared. The overwhelming light instantly collided with the black tide. Although the starry sky was lonely, it was never lonely. For survival, war was the eternal theme. Perhaps no one knew the meaning of survival. Or perhaps, survival itself was a unique meaning. The boiling sword energy madly stirred the mechanical creatures in all directions. The cold metal kept shattering. The overwhelming parts gradually formed an incomparably huge figure in the distance. This was the end of the world. The essence of the world was darkness, silence, and nothingness. The essence hid everywhere, in dreams, in the depths of consciousness, and in the most fearful place. He didn't know what he was, who he was, and why he could exist. He didn't know what he was. Countless people and countless lives were constantly overlapping in the most trance consciousness. His understanding of himself was being revised over and over again. Li Tianlan's consciousness seemed to be divided into countless personalities, building countless worlds. His consciousness existed in the darkness, as well as in every different world. His self seemed to be scattered all the time, constantly scattered. There seemed to be no obstacle in the world, but there were obstacles everywhere. It was like sitting in countless dreams at the same time. Li Tianlan's consciousness was completely lost. In the darkness, there was no thinking and direction. There were only himself doing different things in one world after another. A large number of pictures appeared, sometimes blurred and sometimes clear. That was an extremely violent explosion. The extremely high temperature ignited the void in an instant. Stars, galaxies, clusters of stars, and endless star areas seemed to die at the same time. The high temperature evaporated everything. The violent explosion seemed to expand wildly outward, but at the same time, it collapsed inward. Nothing could stay. Civilization, the starry sky, everything was completely destroyed in the explosion and high temperature. The picture dimmed down. It dimmed down for a long, long time. In the darkness of nothingness, a light representing infinite vitality appeared, and turned into a picture again. Li Tianlan seemed to have lost all perception of the outside world, and just looked at it numbly. It was a barren mountain. The man and woman in rags looked at each other silently. "Brother." With endless exhaustion, the woman spoke softly. Her voice was cold and dreamy. Even in the most embarrassing state, the woman was still full of an indescribable delicacy and perfection. This was a woman without any flaws. Even the word devastatingly beautiful seemed to be insufficient to describe 1/10,000th of her elegance. This was also a woman Li Tianlan was very familiar with. But the moment he saw her, Li Tianlan suddenly forgot her name. Or it could be said that in the time when he didn't know whether it was real or virtual, she had too many names. Li Tianlan remembered everything. He couldn't remember. He didn't even know what his name was. He listened to the woman call the man in front of her brother. Li Tianlan forgot everything, but at this moment, he could suddenly clearly feel that the equally embarrassed man was himself. "It's only us." The man looked around at the barren mountains that exuded strong vitality, his voice hoarse. "At least it's not too bad." The woman forced a smile. "Maybe. Brother, it's raining. The cosmic radiation is too strong. What is this?" "Mudman, look, this is me, this is you, and my parents, but I can't remember what they look like. There are only the two of us. Are these also us?" "No, there are new friends." Then why do they look like us? Because I can't remember. It's been a long time. I only remember what we look like and forget everything. Are you lonely? No, I have my brother to accompany me. But you will always be lonely. I have an idea. Say it? Maybe we can be husband and wife. But, I'm your sister. It's only the two of us. This is Xian and this is Su. There are 4 people in the Imperial Palace now. I don't like them anymore. I chased Xian and Su out. Are you unhappy? No, it's just that there are only the 2 of us in the Imperial Palace again. Flood so troublesome, they are all troublesome, why war? These stones are very interesting. This is real, beyond the limit. It's beautiful. I like it very much, unfortunately. My name is Xianyuan. I will leave this place eventually. Where to? To explore the world's ultimate. Will you take me with you? Together. Together. Greetings, Your Majesty. We failed? This trip was not in vain, this life was not in vain. What did Your Majesty see? A bunch of random things. Born from nothingness, guarding nothingness. Poor species. That's their only instinct. They can't tolerate us. I call them order. Omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. What is that? Kneeling to God. Why should we kneel to other species when we are born as humans? What is God? The world has a master, but the so-called God. What is it? I am the human emperor, standing shoulder to shoulder with heaven and earth, with ghosts and gods. The human race should have its own persistence. If I die, you will be the human race's general trend. If I return, I will be the divine weapon. Your Majesty, is this your new imperial palace? No, from today onwards, our territory will be called the Time Corridor. Why is it called the Time Corridor? You will understand. In the future. Your Majesty, I am Xianyuan Wushang, Su's son. Yes, Your Majesty, That's not what you used to call me. That was before. It's also now. Just call me Big Brother like before. But you are my father's. That's the real past, or should I say him? Am I or am I not? I'm not sure myself, but you are my brother. Our people have been polluted. Everyone's thoughts have been changed in an instant. The war has begun. Leave here. Under the starry sky, there are no more human emperors. I will pass on the throne to Xianyuan. He has failed. Countless voices reverberated in the air. Blurry images kept flashing. Battleships crisscrossing the starry sky. Dense mechanical creations, twisted and chaotic souls, overwhelming elements and holy light. Li Tianlan didn't think. He accepted the information numbly, but instinctively felt that something was wrong. Everything he had seen and heard seemed to be unreal. It was like a real dream. It didn't seem real at all. A large number of images began to vanish the moment he realized that they were fake. The darkness surged slightly. Li Tianlan moved forward subconsciously. He didn't know where his body was. He just wanted to move forward in the direction of the darkness. In his consciousness, there was a feedback that the darkness was retreating. His numb consciousness began to become active again. His consciousness floated up and drifted into the heavy darkness. There was a touch of pale white in the darkness. The surroundings seemed to be getting colder and colder. The darkness gradually thinned. The whiteness became purer. Li Tianlan floated forward silently for a long time. Without any warning, the boundless darkness suddenly dissipated. The pale white light became extremely dazzling in an instant. It was like snow all over the world. The static wind and snow suddenly became frantic the moment he appeared. In the messy wind and snow, there was an incomparably real, bright, and shining sword light. The moment Li Tianlan saw the sword light, it had already arrived in front of him. Forward. An incomparably resolute, desperate sword. The sword edge seemed to carry the coldness of the ice and snow all over the sky. It penetrated his chest and pierced his heart. The sword energy was surging, and blood was flying. All his consciousness froze in an instant. In Li Tianlan's sight, there was only a pair of eyes that were extremely desperate and a little confused. The pair of eyes looked at him quietly and said softly, "I'm sorry." The snow turned into water. The sound of water filled the sky. Li Tianlan abruptly opened his eyes and sat up in bed. All the wars, all the dreams, and all the chaos seemed to be far away from him in an instant. The pure reality was completely awakened. At the same time, in the vast and endless star zone, the sky was filled with the flames of war. The fierce void storm, the burning and exploding stars, the cosmic rays flying everywhere, and all the cosmic disasters suddenly subsided the moment Li Tianlan opened his eyes. In each star zone, countless battlefields paused at the same time. In the next second, the legions of the space-time corridor, countless artificial creations, a large number of generals, dozens of dukes, and several princes knelt on the ground almost at the same time. Their voices with infinite power rang out from countless battlefields under the starry sky. "Welcome back, Your Majesty." The black ocean surged up and down. The sword light all over the Star River instantly rolled up countless wild waves. The sword energy of the god of war, which was fighting with the Doomsday, suddenly became extremely crazy. The black sky of the Emperor Palace gradually gathered into the figure of a middle-aged man. Facing the direction of Miracle City, he bowed slightly, with a complicated look in his eyes, and remained silent. Golden light shone in the Pinnacle Palace. An extremely dazzling golden beam of light suddenly rushed out of the black hole where the Pinnacle Palace was, spreading to the surrounding star zone at a speed far faster than the speed of light. The golden light crisscrossed. On countless battlefields, everyone in the space-time corridor saw the constantly twisting golden light. The golden light spread all over the void, forming a word that everyone could see clearly: fight to the death. For a long time this was the first time that His Majesty of the space-time corridor made a move. His brush falls on the Star River. This was the most powerful human emperor's decree of the human clan today. It was also the decree of the human emperor. In Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan shook his head hard, feeling a little lost. His consciousness seemed to still be stuck in that eternal darkness, at that final stab into his heart, at that pair of incomparably despairing and deathly still eyes. He sat quietly and kept silent for a long time. The endless water light slowly disappeared. Xianyuan Wushang put away the crystal bottle in his hand and smiled. "It's good that you're awake." After a pause he continued, "Congratulations, Your Majesty." "Tianlan?" Qin Weibai walked quickly to Li Tianlan, hugged his shoulder, and touched his head subconsciously. She whispered, "It's okay, it's okay." Li Tianlan quietly looked into Qin Weibai's eyes. His eyes were a little strange. "What's wrong?" Qin Weibai was a little confused. "It's okay." Li Tianlan shook his head slightly. All the pictures and conversations he saw in his sleep were dissipating at an unprecedented speed, becoming more and more blurred. But the last pair of eyes he saw became clearer and clearer. That was Qin Weibai's eyes. They were exactly the same as Qin Weibai's eyes, but they were not like her eyes at all. "I had a dream." Li Tianlan hugged Qin Weibai tightly and whispered, "I dreamed that you killed me." Chapter 1036. Qin Weibai's body obviously stiffened for a moment. She moved in Li Tianlan's arms, but Li Tianlan's palm was too strong for her to break free. She could only subconsciously look away and murmur, "What are you talking about? It's just a dream." Li Tianlan shook his head. He was a little confused, but his mind was surprisingly clear. It was a completely indescribable feeling. Li Tianlan had never even felt such a state. Rational, clear, and sharp. Not only his mind, but even his body was extremely sensitive. His body trembled slightly, and he instinctively moved his muscles. He said slowly, "And it seems, I also dreamed that you were my sister. It was a little messy, and there was a war." Qin Weibai's face turned slightly red. She seemed to think of something and quietly glared at Li Tianlan, thinking that he was flirting with her. Li Tianlan said slowly, and his brows gradually furrowed. He tried hard to recall what he saw in the dream. Countless pictures, countless voices, countless countries, and the same supreme figure. The extremely clear pictures began to dissipate quickly the moment he woke up. Li Tianlan instinctively wanted to pursue something, but the more he tried to recall, the faster the pictures in his mind disappeared. He fell silent. All the pictures disappeared. Only Qin Weibai's desperate and confused eyes in the dream were left. Li Tianlan's brows furrowed more tightly. He suddenly felt a little irritable and became more silent. Tianlan, how do you feel now? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? You were seriously injured when you first came back. Now we can do a further detailed examination. Qin Weibai reached out and smoothed Li Tianlan's frowning brows. Her voice was gentle. I'm fine. I'm just a little hungry, Li Tianlan said subconsciously. At his level of martial arts, he had a very precise understanding of his own body. He could even feel the flow of his blood, the changes of his muscles and bones every time he exerted force. Only by making precise use of his body could he exert the most powerful combat power. He was now convinced that there was nothing wrong with his body. He was just a little hungry, very hungry, very hungry. Li Tianlan suddenly froze and raised his head to look around. All his consciousness finally became completely clear. Is this in Tiannan? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and asked. He did not know how long he had been in a coma. Although the images in his coma gradually faded and disappeared, the sense of confusion that seemed to cross countless years did not disappear. It was not until Qin Weibai mentioned his injury that he remembered something. After leaving Mount Dibing, Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangta launched the most fatal sneak attack on him at the most impossible time. Although he had recovered from his injury, his physical strength had been exhausted, and he could not make a conventional counterattack at all. At that moment, he used the last bit of Wu Qing's energy to try to reincarnate the sword qi he had sensed in the sky earlier. Even he wasn't sure if it was sword qi. That kind of perception was too vague, and Li Tianlan was not sure. But in that situation, it was the only way for him to fight back. Li Tianlan didn't think there was any power he couldn't control. He had considered the possibility that he would be heavily injured, but he had never thought that the moment the sword qi appeared in his hand, his body would be unable to withstand the absolute burden and completely collapse. Thoroughly. Yes, it was the most thorough collapse. The moment the sword qi appeared, Li Tianlan couldn't see what was happening in front of him. He vaguely remembered that his body had suffered the strongest tearing at the same time the sword qi appeared. His body collapsed and his consciousness blurred. When he opened his eyes, he was already in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan's fingers moved. A subtle but extremely sharp sword qi appeared at his fingertips. The vague sword qi twisted wildly at an unimaginable speed. At this moment, Li Tianlan only needed to snap his fingers, and the entire Emperor Dong's palace would be completely shattered by this subtle sword qi. Once again, Li Tianlan confirmed his status. Now he was undoubtedly in the peak state. To be exact, he was even better than his previous strongest state. What had happened since he was in a coma? Li Tianlan was silent for a while and suddenly asked, "How long have I been in a coma?" Qin Weibai was silent and looked at Li Tianlan with a strange look in her eyes. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and whispered, "Has it been a long time?" Qin Weibai took her mobile phone and clicked on the call record. The call at the top of the call record was to Naylan Shuriying, which showed that the time was 25 minutes ago. The second call was between her and Li Tianlan, 3 minutes and 3 minutes ago. 33 minutes. Li Tianlan was stunned for a while and raised his head. "I was in a coma for half an hour?" "Yes." Qin Weibai nodded. "And this half an hour also included the time when Naylan examined your body and recorded your physical data. Less than 2 minutes after we ended the call, you appeared in Emperor Dong's palace." Qin Weibai's tone became more and more confused. When she first saw Li Tianlan's injury, she couldn't care about anything else. But now that she thought about it again, she found that there was something wrong everywhere. The most incredible part was the journey from Beihai to Tiannan. At that time, Xianyuan Wushang was in East Island, and Li Tianlan was in Beihai. But when Li Tianlan was seriously injured, it was Xianyuan Wushang who took him back to Tiannan. A few minutes. The so-called few minutes were the time after Xianyuan Wushang put Li Tianlan in the bedroom and found Qin Weibai. That was to say, in that very short time, Xianyuan Wushang went from East Island to Beihai, and then from the northernmost tip of Zhongzhou State to the southernmost tip of Zhongzhou State to Tiannan. What kind of speed was that? It was not even a matter of speed, but something impossible. Love. But the so-called impossible had happened just like that. The more Qin Weibai thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. It was hard for her to describe her inner feelings. Xianyuan Wushang's behavior showed that he was not hostile to Emperor Dong's palace, but had great kindness. But after everything went out of control, Qin Weibai's inner uneasiness gradually became clear. This is Xianyuan Wushang. Qin Weibai said softly, he brought you here. Maybe only he knows the answer to many things. Li Tianlan was stunned and turned his head subconsciously. The harmless fat man in his sight suddenly became clear. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly for a moment. This was his bedroom. If it weren't for Qin Weibai's reminder, he wouldn't even notice that there was a person standing next to him. Xianyuan Wushang frowned tightly and looked a little hesitant. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the fat man in front of him. He didn't feel any aura from Xianyuan Wushang. It was any aura. This was undoubtedly a completely different feeling from Qin Weibai. In Li Tianlan's perception, Xianyuan Wushang didn't even have the most basic aura of life. He seemed to be a shadow, not a living person at all. Are you Xianyuan Wushang? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Big brother, you don't know me? Xianyuan Wushang frowned even more, and his tone was filled with deep confusion. Have we met? Li Tianlan was a little surprised. Xianyuan Wushang took a deep look at him and said softly, I thought you had seen me when you were in a coma. When I was in a coma, Li Tianlan shook his head. I had a lot of messy dreams. That's the problem. Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly. Why did you have dreams, big brother? What do you mean? Li Tianlan looked at him and asked. You shouldn't be dreaming in your current state. Dreams are the symbol of chaos, or rather the symbol of shadow. Chaos, disorder, weirdness. You shouldn't be dreaming. Big brother, are you sure you were dreaming when you were in a coma? Xianyuan Wushang asked seriously. Li Tianlan didn't understand. He just narrowed his eyes and said flatly, I'm not sure. I've forgotten. Xianyuan Wushang stood where he was and kept silent for a long time. Li Tianlan couldn't be sure whether he was dreaming or not. Xianyuan Wushang couldn't be sure either. Some things had obviously gone awry. What on earth had Li Tianlan experienced when he was in a coma? Xianyuan Wushang wasn't qualified to know this question. But he was very clear that if Li Tianlan was really dreaming, then the problem was already very big. If I was really dreaming, what does it mean? Li Tianlan asked casually. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a long time, and then he said softly, pollution. Chapter 1037. Light the fire, stir-fry, steam, cook, plate, the aroma filled the air. Yu Donglai was busy. Yu Qingyan was busy. In the small cafeteria of Emperor Dong's palace, more than a dozen chefs were busy. The steamed rice was placed in an insulated wooden bucket. One after another, dishes that looked, smelled, and tasted good were carried out like flowing water. The kitchen once again began to prepare new dishes. The small cafeteria of Emperor Dong's palace was full of the top chefs of Zhongzhou State. The chefs of major cuisines were divided into small groups. In addition, there were Western cuisines and desserts, all of which were top elites. At this time, everyone was busy, with a touch of anxiety and even panic on their faces. Yu Qingyan put aside the cut beef, glanced at the oil in the pot, and skillfully fiddled with the fat fish around her. She frowned slightly and whispered, Grandpa, is there any problem? Who knows? Yu Donglai also frowned. I just went over to have a look, and there seemed to be no problem. He stopped stir-frying and then shook his head. What did Sister Little Bai say? Yu Qingyan asked. She didn't say anything, so let's continue. Yu Donglai sighed. There was only one reason why the entire small cafeteria was busy. Li Tianlan was very hungry. Everyone would be hungry. At first, no one took this matter to heart. Since His Majesty was hungry, they just needed to prepare food. The Sichuan cuisine group prepared a table full of Sichuan dishes for Li Tianlan, with meat and vegetables, spicy and appetizing. Li Tianlan's time in Tiannan was very short, and every chef in Emperor Dong's palace wanted to show off their skills in front of His Majesty. When the first table of food was finished in more than 10 minutes, the chefs were simply surprised. They felt that His Majesty had a big appetite, but they were not too surprised. The body of a martial arts expert needed an astonishing amount of energy, so many experts liked all kinds of high-calorie food very much. Since His Majesty still needed more, they would cook another table. The first table was quickly removed. The second table was quickly added, and then removed at a faster speed. The third table. Soon, everyone felt that something was wrong. Martial arts experts did have more food needs than ordinary people, but His Majesty seemed to eat a little too much. They couldn't even keep up with His Majesty's speed of destroying food. The groups of major cuisines were alarmed. Then it was Western food. In the end, even Yu Donglai, who seldom came to the kitchen, rushed over. No one had a specific count of how much Li Tianlan had eaten. Roughly speaking, Li Tianlan had eaten nearly 20 kilograms of rice and the same amount of various meats in less than 3 hours. Obviously, Li Tianlan was still hungry. Thus, the kitchen was still busy. The food and drinks were consumed quickly. The dishes were brought down and served again. All the major cuisines appeared one after another. Li Tianlan did not refuse anyone. His table manners were not disheveled, and could even be said to be gentle and quiet. The only thing that stood out was the speed at which he ate. Soon, Li Tianlan ate very fast, but he didn't make any sound from beginning to end. His stomach was like a bottomless pit. The moment he saw the food, the endless hunger seemed to swallow his reason. He kept eating, and even had no time to talk. Qin Weibai had been sitting quietly beside Li Tianlan, watching him eat. What Li Tianlan ate was enough to stun people, but Qin Weibai didn't mean to stop him. She already felt something was wrong, but her instinct kept reminding her that it was nothing. Xianyuan Wushang sat opposite Li Tianlan, smiling with a simple and honest face. His eyes were a little dazed with deep nostalgia. In his most distant memory, when he met Li Tianlan for the first time, His Majesty had said something to him that had influenced him for a long time. Appetite determines strength. This sentence had become the truth followed by several princes and palace masters in the space-time corridor until now. The only difference was that Xianyuan Wushang inexplicably ate himself into a fat man, while his brothers and sisters were all graceful and dignified. He shook his head slightly and sighed. No one knew what he was thinking. What's wrong? Li Tianlan suddenly glanced at him. His mouth was full of food, but his voice was still clear. Appetite determines strength. This sentence is very suitable for you, big brother. Xianyuan Wushang began to flatter without hesitation. Li Tianlan ignored him and continued to eat. He was not a fool. By now he had naturally found that something was wrong. But the problem was that the feeling of hunger was still stubbornly there. Every cell in his body was thirsting for energy. It seemed that no matter how much he ate, he couldn't fill his stomach. All the food was completely digested the moment he swallowed it. Until now, hunger was not just a feeling. It always existed in Li Tianlan's body. This feeling was not only psychological, but also physical. He had a lot of questions to ask Xianyuan Wushang, but he was really not in the mood to ask. What the hell is going on? Qin Weibai subconsciously glanced at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang's background was extremely mysterious, and he claimed to be a doctor. In the whole Emperor Dong's palace, maybe only he could explain Li Tianlan's phenomenon. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and shook his head. It's not a big problem. It's just that your body needs energy now, and the energy provided by these foods is far from enough. The real brand in Li Tianlan's body had not recovered, but the medicine to heal him came from the god of war realm. It was mixed with some real potion, which completely stimulated the real brand in Li Tianlan's body. It was no exaggeration to say that the inside of Li Tianlan's body was changing all the time, becoming more and more perfect. The transformation of the body required a lot of energy. After the baptism of the real potion, most of the food in Miracle City could no longer provide effective energy for Li Tianlan. Of course, it was not completely ineffective, but the effect was extremely poor. Li Tianlan's body needed more and more energy. The so-called 1 kilogram of rice was equivalent to a few grains of rice for Li Tianlan. Of course, he could be full if he kept eating, but it would take time. Xianyuan Wushang looked down at his watch and whispered, "Soon." Qin Weibai slightly raised her eyebrows. When she was about to ask something, the roar of the helicopter's rotors sounded in the sky above Emperor Dong's palace. The helicopter had not yet landed. An extremely steady footstep had already appeared in front of the small restaurant. Xing Tian, who was extremely burly, bent down and walked in. Li Tianlan looked up at him, seeming to be a little surprised by his size. He nodded and then continued to fight with the food in front of him. "Your Majesty." Xing Tian bowed deeply to Li Tianlan, and his voice was respectful and awe-inspiring. Li Tianlan hummed and said vaguely, "Sit down and have something to eat." Xing Tian subconsciously looked at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang made a gesture of drinking water. Xing Tian understood. He searched in his backpack and found a bottle of unlabeled purified water. "Big brother, this is a special water source developed by our family. It tastes good. Try it." Xianyuan Wushang took the cup and water, poured a cup for Li Tianlan, and put it in front of him with both hands. Li Tianlan drank it without any hesitation. He really didn't know what to guard against Xianyuan Wushang. It was a very subtle intuition. From the first time he saw this fat man, Li Tianlan felt that he was very pleasing to the eye, trustworthy. And if he really wanted to harm him, he would have died many times by now. The pure water went down his throat and into his abdomen. The pure water was cold, but the moment the liquid entered his abdomen, it suddenly turned into a warm current. Majestic energy burst out of his body in an instant. With only one cup, Li Tianlan's hunger was suddenly reduced. A vast white mist gushed out of his body without warning. The white mist came out of his body in wisps, further perfecting his body. Li Tianlan closed his eyes subconsciously. His mind had never been clearer. His perception had never been sharper. His body had never been more perfect. The infinite energy eased his hunger and enriched every cell in his body. Li Tianlan could even feel every inch of his muscles cheering. The strength of his body, which had been pulling him forward, was increasing at a slow but extremely clear rate. His body had been extremely perfect before. His strength, speed, and willpower had all reached their limits. However, it was precisely because it was too perfect that it became imperfect without the support of absolute physical strength. Therefore, Li Tianlan had never entered the invincible realm. According to his normal growth rate, it would take at least 3 to 5 years for him to officially enter the invincible realm. At that time, Li Tianlan would be nearly 30 years old, which was also an absolutely shocking age compared to his realm. But now, with this cup of water, his body, which was already at a critical point, suddenly broke through some kind of barrier. Of course, this was not the work of this cup of water. This glass of water was like a primer. The potion that was mixed with the truth was the real priceless treasure. That potion. Li Tianlan's body was repaired at the deepest level. The transformation had been going on, but Li Tianlan's body always lacked enough energy. All the energy of the truth potion was used to repair Li Tianlan's injuries and stimulate his real brand. So the transformation was greatly slowed down. At this time, the bottle of pure water that Xianyuan Wushang took out came from the famous immortal spring in the time corridor. Different from the diluted water that Xianyuan Wushang drank, this bottle was pure spring water from the immortal spring. The incomparably majestic energy suddenly became a primer and a catalyst. The energy filled Li Tianlan's body and was absorbed by his body. The transformation was greatly accelerated. In this state, Li Tianlan could break through to the invincible realm in the fastest time. This so-called fastest time might be a few minutes, a few hours, or a day. Li Tianlan suddenly stood up. He took a deep look at Xianyuan Wushang, nodded and said, "Excuse me." He glanced at Qin Weibai, nodded, and disappeared in an instant. "This is..." Qin Weibai was a little surprised. "Big brother is going to break through." Xianyuan Wushang laughed sincerely. "Breakthrough?" Qin Weibai looked surprised. "Heavenly Sun? Invincible realm." Xianyuan Wushang smiled. "But Big Brother, who has entered the invincible realm, can barely be called the heavenly son of this era." "Barely?" Qin Weibai frowned. "There are still opponents." Muttering to himself, Li Tianlan looked at the sky outside the window. Li Tianlan's transformation was getting faster and faster. That feeling seemed to have been connected to Miracle City and formed a very special signal. Xianyuan Wushang could feel this signal. So could the War God realm. Xianyuan Wushang lowered his head and took a sip of wine. Somehow, there seemed to be a crack in the world. He twitched the corner of his mouth and said softly, "The distinguished guest is here." Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes. "Xing Tian," Xianyuan Wushang suddenly said. "Go and say hello to our distinguished guest." Me. Xing Tian was obviously stunned. He knew who the so-called distinguished guest was. The youngest son that the war god valued the most. Lin Shi, the 11th prince of the war god realm. There was no so-called crown prince in places like the Time Corridor, the Emperor Palace, and the war god realm. Lin Shi was basically the most important prince in the war god realm. Let him go and say hello and give him a show of strength. It was not that Xing Tian was afraid, but he really felt that he was not important enough. "Don't worry." Xianyuan Wushang sneered and said, "Big brother is here, he dare not do anything to you." "Okay." Xing Tian answered in a low voice, turned around and strode away without hesitation. "Who is the distinguished guest you mentioned?" Qin Weibai suddenly asked as she watched Xing Tian's figure disappear. "The uninvited guest." Xianyuan Wushang shook his head and said, "His name is Lin Shi, a calligrapher and a battle maniac. I don't like that guy very much. If everything goes well, you should see him soon, sister-in-law." Lin Shi. Qin Weibai frowned tightly. She had never heard of this name. There was no such name in the memory of her other self. "Will he be a match for Tianlan?" Qin Weibai asked. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. In terms of authority, the 11th prince of the God of War's realm was a bit higher than him, the 9th prince of the space-time corridor. Furthermore, the other party's authority was neutral, so he could directly reach the top. In terms of combat strength, Lin Shi's combat strength was higher than the current Li Tianlan's. Because of this, he had not appeared when Li Tianlan woke up. It had been a few hours since Li Tianlan woke up, but he did not know how long it had been in the war god realm. What the other side had been waiting for was undoubtedly Li Tianlan's transformation. Li Tianlan was no match for Lin Shi now, but it was hard to say after he broke through and officially entered the invincible realm. No matter how high Lin Shi's authority was, this was still the Miracle City, the real Miracle City. As long as his authority did not reach the top, he would almost never be a big threat to Li Tianlan. It was true that the war god was arrogant and strong, but no matter how arrogant he was, he did not have the guts to send a son who could crush Li Tianlan to make trouble for him. This time, the war god realm was really sincere in this deal. Xianyuan Wushang thought silently and said softly, "Next it will be very lively." Chapter 1038. Barren Mountain Snow Flames Wreckage. The flying object, full of iron-blooded style and metallic texture, smashed into the top of an inaccessible snowy mountain in the European continent. The sound of the engine exploding shook the wilderness. Broken parts flew everywhere, and some deformed alloys flew everywhere in the rapid shuttle. Sparks rang out in the explosion, enveloping the extremely delicate flying object. In the silence, only the fire caused by the explosion slowly burned in the snow. The cold wind howled at the top of the mountain, and the snow flew everywhere. The raging flames kept burning the flying object, but it could no longer cause a second explosion. The rising temperature began to gradually extinguish, and countless parts and charred marks on the ground were quickly buried by the snow. In the silence, the metal flying object that was paralyzed on the top of the snowy mountain suddenly shook abruptly. Bang! An incomparably dull sound of impact rang out. The first sound, the second sound, and the next sound came one after another. An incomparably huge force shook the mountain, bombarding the door of the flying object persistently. Bang! The continuous bombardment lasted for a long time, and the huge and heavy alloy door was suddenly completely blown away, smashing into the snow dozens of meters away. The door left the body of the flying object, and began to quickly melt in the snow, turning into a metal liquid, and then quickly disappeared. Light footsteps rang out from the long passage of the flying object. A young man who seemed to be less than 30 years old appeared in front of the door, looking expressionlessly at the snowy mountain outside the window. Black clothes, black hair, a slender figure of 185 meters. The young man's appearance was not very handsome, but it could definitely be said that he was handsome. The lines of his face were extremely stiff, angular, and sharp like a knife. It seemed to be a kind of toughness and indifference that penetrated from the bones. Every move of his was full of aggression and a sense of oppression. He stood silently in front of the door, stretched out his hand, and casually shook it. The accumulated snow on the mountain suddenly danced wildly in the air, and the cold air within a radius of several miles quickly condensed. There was no snow on the ground, but there was no mud either. The entire snow-capped mountain turned into a crystal-clear iceberg in an instant. The young man slowly walked out of the door and stepped on the hard ice. His expression became colder and colder, and the light in his pupils flowed, shining brightly. His pupils could be said to be his most attractive feature. The young man's eyes were deep and serene. What was different was that each of his eyes had 2 pupils. He was born with double pupils. It wasn't the kind of double pupils that took up almost all of the whites of the eyes. The pupils in the young man's eyes were slightly smaller than those of ordinary people, but the 2 pupils in each eye were connected, exquisite, mysterious, and beautiful. His appearance was extremely firm and cold, but his pair of extremely deep double pupils gave him an inexplicable and demonic aura. As he stood on the ice, everything around him was clearly reflected in his eyes. The young man was followed by a middle-aged man and a woman. Both of them looked ordinary, but their auras were exactly the same as the young man. They were expressionless and had incomparably cold faces. Perhaps it was a little pretentious. However, the 3 of them kept a straight face. They were as cold and indifferent as one could imagine, and as sinister as one could imagine. No one spoke. None of them could open their mouths. In silence, the 3 of them slowly moved forward, following the path under their feet down the mountain. The middle-aged man behind the young man turned around and waved at the flying object behind him. The scrapped flying object instantly became illusory, and then dissolved at a speed visible to the naked eye. The flying object disintegrated without a sound or trace. The 3 of them, who had been silent, walked forward, also silently. The atmosphere was silent and cold. "Linshi!" An incomparably tranquil voice suddenly rang out. Without warning. It was impossible to tell from which direction it came. This voice rang out in an incomparably stable and clear manner. It was indifferent, without the slightest hint of emotion. The 3 of them, who had been moving forward, stopped at the same time. Linshi, who was walking at the forefront with no expression, narrowed his eyes and looked around carefully and seriously. The snow, the ice. The world was quiet. "Linshi." The voice sounded again, unhurried and emotionless. The corner of Linshi's mouth twitched, and a bitter smile and helplessness flashed across his extremely deep but demonic eyes. He resisted the urge to speak. But the middle-aged woman who had been following him was a little uneasy. She hesitated and suddenly said in a deep voice, "May I know which distinguished guest is?" She seemed to want to say something. But before she could finish her sentence, she suddenly bent down. Ugh, cough, ugh. The almost heart-wrenching sound of retching suddenly sounded. The woman suddenly bent down and vomited. But it seemed that her body was too clean, so although the sound of retching was clear, she couldn't vomit anything. Linshi's face was slightly pale. He, who had endured to the extreme, finally collapsed after hearing the sound of retching. All the indifference and expressionless face that he had forced to maintain completely disappeared. He also bent down and vomited. Only the middle-aged man behind Linshi still looked around vigilantly. Linshi and the middle-aged woman kept retching. They hadn't eaten for a long time, so they couldn't vomit anything at all. But the more they couldn't vomit, the more uncomfortable they felt. The heart-wrenching sound of retching kept ringing, which was extremely uncomfortable to the ears. At least the expression of the middle-aged man standing behind Linshi became obviously a little abnormal. From the war god realm to the miracle city. This was even more difficult to accept than coming from the space-time corridor to the miracle city. This was not simply a problem of distance. There was also a series of changes in authority, suppression of authority, and the conflict between reality and illusion. The changes had already begun. From the moment they entered the solar system, all kinds of changes had been happening, and the closer they were to the miracle city, the more serious it was. The moment the spacecraft entered the atmosphere of the miracle city, it completely lost control. The authority was completely suppressed. Reality and illusion alternated. Under such circumstances, except for some special abilities, everyone would have some incomparably wrong perceptions of their own bodies. Dizziness, nausea, retching, and then a serious phenomenon of seasickness would occur. After getting off the spacecraft, Lin Shi had been adjusting his body, trying to regain control of his own body. If this was the territory of the war god realm, he wouldn't have to work so hard, and he could vomit without worrying about his image. But this was the space-time corridor. As the 11th prince of the war god realm, even if the flames of war were raging, his every move would be watched. He came here to ask for Li Tianlan's help. Anything related to Li Tianlan was the top priority in the space-time corridor. From the second he appeared here, all his actions would be seen by the higher-ups of the space-time corridor. Lin Shi really wanted to resist the dizziness and nausea. He didn't want to lose face for the war god realm at all. His slight nervousness, under the condition of confusion in his body's cognition, was completely cold and aloof. If this went on, he would probably be able to recover in an hour at most. But who would have thought that just after he took a few steps, the people of the space-time corridor would come and not only come, but also greet him? Lin Shi really didn't want to speak, didn't want to break the rules, but as soon as the female assistant behind him spoke, everything became out of control. Lin Shi bent over and held his knees, coughing constantly, and vomiting to his heart's content. "For me, you are the distinguished guests." A slow and indifferent voice sounded in the midst of the retching. "You three have worked hard to come from afar." Lin Shi lowered his head. He really didn't have the strength to talk in a short time. An elegant and natural fragrance appeared in the air. Lin Shi bent over, and a white dress appeared in his sight. The dress was ethereal, shimmering slightly, and a delicate fragrance lingered. As he approached, the world seemed to have a very subtle change unconsciously. Lin Shi almost regained his cognition of the body in an instant. All the retching and nausea disappeared. The delicate fragrance floated, and seemed to surround the entire snow-capped peak. Lin Shi was a little embarrassed and a little dazed. He raised his head subconsciously. In his sight, the white dress was as white as snow. It was a figure emitting a hazy shimmer from head to toe. Like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. The white dress in his sight seemed extremely quiet, but also seemed to be walking all the time. She was like one person, but also like thousands of people occupying the world. In Lin Shi's eyes, there seemed to be different figures appearing in different directions, more and more, occupying his eyes, like an extremely dreamy phantom. Lin Shi couldn't see her face. The light gauze white dress, the clear light lingering, everything in front of him was in a trance. When absolute beauty reached the pinnacle, everything in sight would become an illusion. What couldn't be seen clearly and couldn't be remembered was always the most beautiful. Wave-treading micro-steps, her socks stirred up dust. She stood there quietly, her eyes as clear as water as she looked at the three distinguished guests from the war god realm. However, in the eyes of the three of them, it was as if there were countless white robes fluttering in the wind, like fairies flying in the sky. Lin Shi's breathing even disappeared. He stood there in a daze, and there was only one sentence left in his mind. Like a light cloud covering the moon, swaying like the snow in the flowing wind. No words could describe the breathtaking moment at this moment. The extreme beauty was like an illusory and ethereal dream. Infinite joy and infinite disappointment. In the hazy light, the woman in white frowned slightly and said softly, "Presumptuous." Her voice was as ethereal as fog, but it was as shocking as thunder. Lin Shi's face suddenly became pale. He suddenly closed his eyes, and two dazzling lines of blood flowed directly from his pupils. "Your Highness." The middle-aged woman behind Lin Shi was suddenly shocked and subconsciously supported him. Hurriedly glancing back, she suddenly found that not only Lin Shi, but her other colleague was also in an extremely embarrassing state. The woman's arm trembled, and her heart suddenly sank. No one knew their strength better than the three of them. Lin Shi was the most valued prince of the war god realm. If there was a so-called prince of the war god realm, this position would definitely be Lin Shi's. The reason why he was valued was not only because of his resemblance to the war god, but more importantly, because of his talent and the strength that had realized part of his talent and potential over the years. No matter where Lin Shi was, he was not weak. And the two of them could become Lin Shi's assistants this time, so they were not weak either. But now, she subconsciously glanced at the white dress opposite her. The white dress became quiet again, just standing there silently. None of the three people in the war god realm could determine where she was. They couldn't even determine how far away she was from them, let alone determine what she was doing now. Everything they saw was an illusion. At this moment, she completely deceived their perception, and even deceived their perception of the miracle city. In their line of sight, the other party was indeed standing opposite them. But in reality, the other party might have pointed the weapon at their vital points. This kind of deception, whether in the time corridor or in the war god realm, had the same name: deception. But such a high-end deception. What was the highest authority of deception? The middle-aged woman thought about it, and her face became paler. The middle-aged man behind Lin Shi barely stabilized his body, raised his hand and touched his temple. A stream of nanoparticles extended out of nothingness and quickly turned into a pair of glasses. A virtual electric current flashed across the middle-aged man's eyes. His eyes seemed to turn into electronic cigarettes in an instant. Countless signals covered the area. He carefully looked at the woman in white opposite him, and all the signals were trying to lock onto the other party's position. But in his line of sight, the other party was still standing there quietly, without any change. The countless signals only returned a little bit of information, and not much information quickly appeared on his monocle. Target can't be locked on. Physical constant deviation, deviation index. Detected peak energy source, data matching failed. Target identity, unknown. Detected target authority, unknown. Alignment, neutral. Detected target. Target location locked, lock failed. Analyzing target's emotional fluctuations, analysis failed. Detected? Cold sweat flowed down the middle-aged man's forehead, across the bridge of his nose, across his chin, and fell to the ground. They were all question marks. If he wasn't strong enough, this kind of detection would indeed make him speechless. But the problem wasn't his strength at all. He was the apostle of destruction. The position second only to the apocalypse. In the neutral alignment, the apostle was the peak of the human race's control. But the results of his detection were all question marks. What did this mean? The peak energy source. This description was enough to explain everything. The peak energy source on the path of deception. A woman, an incredibly beautiful woman. He really couldn't detect the other party's identity. But because he couldn't detect the other party's identity, he was able to further confirm the other party's identity. More and more cold sweat flowed down his forehead. The moment he confirmed the other party's identity, the middle-aged man only felt his scalp tingle. The middle-aged woman's expression was uncertain. Lin Shi, who steadied himself, was also a little confused. The middle-aged man gritted his teeth, took half a step forward, bowed deeply, and said with great respect, "Your Highness, is your surname Feng?" Feng. Even though Lin Shi's father was the god of war, he felt like he was struck by lightning at this moment. He wondered if the way he walked out of the cabin door was too unfriendly and too pretentious, which was why he saw this person in front of him. At this moment, Lin Shi not only felt his scalp tingle, but even his hair all over his body stood up. A neutral female who dealt a heavy blow to the three of them with one sentence. A master of the space-time corridor. Feng. This identity was so clear that there wouldn't be a second one in the entire space-time corridor. Lin Shi took a deep breath and bowed slightly solemnly. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end he smiled bitterly. God of War's Lin Shi, greets your highness. Princess Royal of the space-time corridor. It sounded like she was the elder sister or younger sister of the human emperor in the space-time corridor. But in fact, because it had existed for so long, the seniority in the space-time corridor had long been a mess, and it was impossible to sort it out. This had always been the case. This was something that the God of War's realm, and the human emperor palace liked to complain about. But as time went by, the seniority in the god of war's realm and the human emperor palace became more and more chaotic. Except for immediate family, all seniority seemed to be constantly changing. Not to mention the other two majesties in the space-time corridor. Now one had not returned and had just touched the real stamp, but the other was already standing at the top. If one were to talk about the original relationship, the one in Miracle City was even several generations older than the majesty in the space-time corridor. But now the ninth prince of the space-time corridor could call Li Tianlan big brother. Who could explain this to? It was completely unreasonable. The same was true of the princess royal of the space-time corridor. She was the same generation as the majesty in the space-time corridor, but in fact they were not related by blood. The surname Feng had always stood at the top of the space-time corridor. In the space-time corridor, the Feng family was not a hereditary duke, but a hereditary marquis. And it was not even an ordinary duke. It was the kind of duke with the most power. In terms of power, it was even above the king of war. The eldest son of the Feng family was called Qilin. He was the king who was on par with the human emperor in the space-time corridor. He was on par with the human emperor in the space-time corridor. How powerful was that? And the youngest sister of the Feng family, Feng Qinggu, was respected by the emperor of the human emperor palace as his own sister, and was named Princess Royal. Each of the four magnates of the Feng family was an important figure at the peak of power. In the space-time corridor, they were almost as powerful as the surname Xianyuan. However, the Feng clan had already quieted down a long time ago. Although the four magnates all had extremely high statuses, they refused all the positions in the space-time corridor. The Feng clan would only participate in wars. Most of the time, not to mention the war god realm. Even the higher-ups of the space-time corridor rarely saw the people of the Feng clan. If it wasn't for that, the current battle king of the space-time corridor might not be the one he was now. Lin Shi felt like crying. He was the 11th prince of the god of war's realm. This was the first time he came to the space-time corridor. But the princess royal of the Feng family, whom even the princes and princesses of the space-time corridor rarely saw, was now in front of him. How great an honor was this? I'm so King unlucky. What kind of luck was this? His only impression of the eldest princess of the Feng clan seemed to be that she had once caused his mother to suffer a loss many years ago. However, just this alone was enough to make him speechless. I will follow you. The princess royal called Feng Qinggu said calmly. Do what you want to do, and you can pretend that I don't exist. Lin Shi's expression changed. The princess royal of the space-time corridor was following him. This was not an honor, but a great pressure. He knew very well that she would not help him. She was only following him to watch some of his movements. To be exact, she was watching some of his movements when he was facing Li Tianlan. Lin Shi was in a dilemma. He could not fathom the princess royal's character. Maybe Li Tianlan did not feel much about many things, but when the princess royal was unhappy, she would make him evaporate. He wanted to experience life and death, but this kind of life and death experience was of no value to him. This kind of thing was completely possible. If it were someone else, even if it were other lords of the space-time corridor here, Lin Shi would not be so flustered. But the princess royal in front of him. From the original relationship, the princess royal could be said to be the descendant of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. And she was a direct descendant. No one could say for sure whether Li Tianlan was still the original majesty. But whether he was or not, he would be another majesty of the space-time corridor. He came from the war god realm to experience some trials. In the eyes of the princess royal, maybe he was shameless and wanted to bully her father. If the princess royal really wanted to kill him, Lin Shi even suspected that he would not be able to live to see Li Tianlan. I can assure the space-time corridor that in Miracle City, I will pay attention to my behavior. Your Highness, why do you have to work so hard? Lin Shi smiled dryly. Feng Qinggu did not speak. This is against the rules. Lin Shi wanted to be tough, but he really did not have the confidence. He could only say humbly, Your Highness, I hope you can understand that this is the rule of the war god realm and the space-time corridor. It is the rule of the space-time corridor, not mine. Feng Qinggu said calmly. I have my own rules. Either you go back to the War God realm immediately, or you stay. I will keep an eye on you. This is a little difficult for me. Lin Shi narrowed his eyes and said softly. Difficult is difficult, so be it. Feng Qinggu said calmly. Your Highness is so arrogant. Do you really not take the War God realm seriously? Lin Shi's voice was calm. I repeat, this is the deal between my father and His Majesty Xianyuan. So what? Feng Qinggu asked quietly. Lin Shi paused. In Miracle City, even if Lin Xianyuan himself comes, I will tell him to follow my rules. A cold look of anger flashed across the faces of the three people from the War God realm. But they could not say anything. The environment of Miracle City was extremely special. It was not that there was no such place, but it was very rare. In such an environment, everyone's strength would be suppressed to a certain extent. They knew what the reason was, but they did not know the principle behind it. A figure at the level of the War God, even if he was suppressed in Miracle City, would still have the ability to destroy the world, but here, his strength would still be reduced. Feng Qinggu was different. She walked on the path of deception, and she had reached the peak of it. Outside Miracle City, she was far from being a match for the War God, but in Miracle City, she could use deception to gain peak combat power for a short period of time. She might not be able to defeat the War God, but it would be extremely difficult for the War God to deal with her. The path of deception was not known for its combat power. However, this path had its own uses. For a top expert like Feng Qinggu, her greatest use was on the battlefield. The bigger the battlefield, the more useful she would be. Apart from that, the greatest use of this path was civil war. The civil war of the human race. The space-time corridor could be peaceful. The War God realm and the Mortal Palace could be peaceful. Although both parties had been cooperating for a long time, local conflicts were inevitable. Not to mention the subtle relationship between both parties. Even the forces under the rule of the space-time corridor had never gotten along well with each other. Wars, both internal and external, had never stopped. The War God realm really had no way to deal with a top expert like Feng Qinggu. Lin Shi's expression turned ugly. He kept silent for a long time before saying slowly, Princess Royal, don't forget that His Majesty Li Dongqing has been in the War God realm ever since the previous failure. Feng Qinggu remained silent for a while before replying indifferently. Lin Shi took a deep look at her and nodded. If that's the case, please go ahead, Your Highness. Clear light lingered and everything was hazy. Feng Qinggu's figure disappeared without a trace. Her last voice slowly sounded on the snow-capped peak, fading into the breeze and the dream. I will keep an eye on you. Chapter 1039. Until Feng Qinggu's figure completely disappeared, Lin Shi and the other two elites of the War God's realm remained motionless. Behind them, the spacecraft integrated with many high-tech technologies of the War God's realm gradually became nothingness in the erosion of the surrounding environment, and the snow mountain turned into an icy peak. Lin Shi and the other two waited for a long time. There was no room for carelessness in the confrontation with the deceiver. There were too many such examples in history. Their direct combat effectiveness was indeed not outstanding, but countless details paved the way. Too many so-called big shots had failed in the hands of the deceiver. Now, although Feng Qinggu had disappeared, no one could be sure that the deceiver had deceived their vision. Feng Qinggu might actually be standing next to them. No one spoke and no one moved. In the cold wind, Lin Shi stood expressionlessly for a long time. He didn't know how long he had been standing there, because he wasn't sure if his vision would deceive him, and he wasn't sure if his perception of time was deceiving him. Is it necessary? Lin Shi muttered to himself in a low voice, breaking the silence. Li Tianlan's current strength might not be considered much in the War God's realm and the time corridor, but in Miracle City, he was close to the real end. The famous King Wei was also by his side, so Lin Shi naturally knew the so-called weight and propriety. Even if these were not mentioned, His Majesty in the past was worthy of everyone's respect, so Lin Shi couldn't really be unscrupulous. He came to Miracle City just to find his own opportunity, to touch the real brand on Li Tianlan and go further. It was as if he excitedly ran over to play a game with Li Tianlan. But the King Princess Royal of the Time Corridor came over with a Star Destroyer and pointed it at his head, constantly monitoring his every move. How nervous must Li Tianlan be to do this? Was it necessary? Your Highness, be careful with your words, the apostle behind Lin Shi said softly. At this time, not to mention whether everything they saw was deceiving them, at least everyone heard what Her Highness said before she disappeared. I will keep an eye on you. This also meant that from now on, their every move in Miracle City would be watched. Not to mention that they couldn't speak carelessly now. Even in the future, they couldn't speak carelessly. The apostle felt a little suffocated in his heart. He really had a belly full of anger with nowhere to vent it. Although there were only 3 people from the War God world, the lineup was already extremely luxurious. He was an apostle, the middle-aged woman was a holy follower, and Lin Shi was included. Any team with a weak point had thought that they could help their prince show off his skills under the eyes of the space-time corridor. However, no one had expected that they would meet the top giants of the space-time corridor as soon as they arrived at their destination. This kind of show of strength was really powerful. The corner of Lin Shi's mouth twitched. He shook his head and didn't say anything in the end. Where to now? He took a tentative step forward, and his figure immediately returned to normal. For the people here, they were the real outsiders. They needed to find a starting point, where to start, how to develop, and how to fight against Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Shi gave the apostle behind him a look. The apostle's eyes flashed and countless data flowed in his pupils, turning into virtual signals one after another. The virtual signals kept spreading with him as the center, invading without any hindrance. Countless information was poured into his mind at the same time. The concept of the earth took shape. All kinds of history and countless people were branded in the depths of his mind at the same time. The virtual data spread in the European continent and swept the whole world. What? The apostle suddenly let out a cry of surprise, and then said, Your Highness, the location of Emperor Dong's palace has been locked down. Someone has protected the database of Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Shi frowned. There was no one here who could resist the invasion of information from the apostle, or even notice it. The protection of Emperor Dong's palace was undoubtedly from Xianyuan Wushang. Even in the War God world, the seemingly harmless and jovial 9th prince of the space-time corridor was also very famous. Lin Shi wasn't sure about his current situation, but it was clearly recorded in the War God world that Xianyuan Wushang, a holy follower, had part of the authority of an apostle in a certain period. If Xianyuan Wushang had the same ability now, it meant that his authority in the Order Camp had reached an unimaginable level. The apostle was second only to the Doomsday, and in the current human clan, it was almost the peak of technological power. The human clan belonged to the neutral camp, and it was impossible for an apostle to become a Doomsday. At this level, it was the limit of the neutral camp after choosing the Order Camp. And the holy follower also belonged to the Order Camp. Xianyuan Wushang had chosen 2 paths of the Order Camp when he didn't have a neutral force as his foundation, and he hadn't been assimilated into the Order Camp until now. This was almost a miracle. His status in the space-time corridor was no lower than Lin Shi's, otherwise he wouldn't have become Li Tianlan's guide. Go around. Lin Shi said calmly. The apostle's eyes flashed slightly, and he said softly, I've found a suitable plan. In the shortest time possible, he had stored all the information in Miracle City. It wasn't memory but storage. When needed, he could recall everything he had stored. The apostle opened his palm. A virtual light curtain rose in front of him, and several continents were spinning rapidly in the light curtain. The continents, the oceans, everything began to converge, and quickly turned into a blue planet. We are now in this position. The apostle's finger tapped slightly on the virtual planet. A tiny red dot appeared on the planet. It's 965 kilometers away from the Lin clan's headquarters in a straight line, but worry-free manner has now been affected by the real brand. It's difficult for us to get close for a certain period of time. The Lin clan is very powerful. In addition to the Lin clan's headquarters on this continent, There are also branches in Europe. I've hacked into their database. In terms of comprehensive strength, the Lin clan's branch in Europe should be the strongest. They should be the descendants of the Holy King. It's difficult for us to find a suitable identity here. The apostle's finger tapped again. The virtual sphere in front of him rotated. This is the most suitable place. As he spoke, his complexion began to darken and become a little darker. This is the non-continent, the apostle said softly. In the records of the Lin clan's headquarters, Worry-Free Manor, a branch went to the non-continent 65 years ago to develop. Until today, they have not contacted the headquarters and have lost contact with the Lin clan's headquarters. I just investigated their information. This branch still exists, but it has been declining for nearly 20 years, and the family is sparsely populated. Your Highness, we can borrow the identity of this family and officially appear in this world. They needed a suitable identity. The declining branch of the non-continent could provide them with such an identity. Even if there was something they couldn't solve, the existence of the apostle could make it seamless. Lin Shi raised his head and looked around. There seemed to be a line of sight falling on him, but the other party didn't say anything. Lin Shi didn't know where the first princess was, and he didn't even know if she was still in Miracle City, but he was sure that he was in the other party's sight. The other party didn't say anything, which meant that she was not dissatisfied with this identity. Lin Shi took a deep breath, suppressed the sullen emotions in his heart, nodded and calmly said, "Then let's start with the non-continent." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.